G'day, May 40 here. I've been working my way through Taylor Sheridan's oeuvre, and that's brought me to his last major TV series that he's written that I have not previously watched, and that's Mayor of Kingstown. It is just a fantastic show, and one of the things that's awesome about it is how it smuggles in like thoughtful ideas and thoughtful monologues that somehow still work. Right? Normally a lengthy monologue is not a lot of fun in a TV show, but somehow Taylor Sheridan makes it work. And this is from Season 1, Episode 7 of Mayor of Kingstown, and illustrates how useful the evolutionary perspective is on life. Now, if you're deeply religious and the evolutionary perspective offends you, then I don't want you to damage your religious faith. But I want to go to this discussion here from Mayor of Kingstown. We've got the mother of two of the main characters who speaks.
Eyes will be on me, or you will be removed from the class. Understood? I think today maybe we'll talk about human evolution, or the lack of it. To think about the evolution of man, it's always a good idea to remember that we're all animals. And the rules which govern the lives of lions, of wolves, of our closest relatives, the primates, are no different than the rules which govern our lives. We are in...
Right, so you can still be religious. You can still believe in the importance of God. You can still believe in the power of the human being to overcome his purely animal nature, but we never get to graduate from being animals. We never get to graduate from these primal instincts. We never get to graduate from the many similarities between us and animals.
Constant competition with each other, competition to breathe.
We're all locked in an iron cage together, and nobody is coming to rescue us. And there's no spiritual or religious system, there is no medication, there's no spiritual practice that will allow us to 100% transcend our animal nature for very long.
Feed, to eat, to seek water, shelter.
So one of the most important things to understand about the differences between men and women is that most men apparently do not reproduce in history, while most women do. So men are strongly incentivized to take risks, while women are not strongly incentivized to take risks because most women will reproduce.
Shelter.
So just that little insight gets you a long way.
Only man cannot survive without a tribe. Empathy exists.
Man cannot survive without a tribe. That's huge. Like, that's a really important insight. All right? We need other people. We need a tribe. We need a community, right? The individualist go-it-alone strategy is rarely a winning strategy. Group strategies will consistently outcompete individualist strategies. So I concluded last night's show talking about Balkan basketball, and they have a team ethic. So if you're contributing to the team, right, you should feel good. That's where your sense of meaning and purpose and fulfillment comes from. First of all, you put something above your own immediate desires, all right? That is the success of the team. And this is a winning formula for basketball and a winning formula for life. You don't first seek personal fulfillment and happiness from your work, from your spouse, from your friends, from your hobbies, from your religion. No, you first seek to fit yourself into an existing order, right, that is outside of you, that transcends you, that is time-tested, and you find your role in this existing order. And you put finding your place in the existing order above satisfying your own whims. And that means there is a moral order that transcends your own ideas about right and wrong. And there is an order of meaning that transcends you. And there is a group whose survival and well-being is, in most instances, more important than your own. And so you find your place in the group where you contribute, you meet your responsibilities, and then out of that should flow your fulfillment and happiness. Now, while you're meeting your responsibilities to a transcendent code of meaning and purpose that exists above and beyond you, right, you can tweak things while meeting your adult responsibilities to then enhance your happiness, to enhance your joy, to enhance your personal fulfillment, while primarily meeting your obligations. It's just like you go to work and your primary duty should be to fulfill the wishes of your boss. Now, while following the wishes of your boss, if you need to add a standing desk, if you need to make some tweaks that enable you to fulfill the wishes of your boss while maximizing your own satisfaction, happiness, and productivity and excellence level, right, then you make those tweaks in the purpose of serving something outside of yourself. So there's just so much discussion in America in particular, but throughout the advanced world, about personal fulfillment, finding personal fulfillment through your work, which I think is a ludicrous primary mission for 99% of people. Rare is the person who gets to find his personal fulfillment through work. Instead, we should be fitting ourselves to a larger order, and that's part of the reason why Serbian basketball and Balkans basketball is so successful, is that the players seek to fit themselves to the community, to the larger group, to see where they can contribute, and then out of that successful mission comes happiness and fulfillment.
To ensure the survival of our offspring, morality, whatever that may mean, exists to govern the behavior of the members within the tribe in hopes that the tribe...
So most groups, all right, look at the world through a basis of dual moralities, all right? There is the morality of how you treat your in-group, and then there is a completely more relaxed morality for how you treat your out-group. It's understandable how this evolutionarily developed for most people, right? Because for millions of years, our ancestors lived within a small group of anywhere up to 150 people, and so you didn't want to do the dirty on them because you would depend on them for your survival, and you would likely spend your entire life within this tiny group. The Daytona 500 is today. Did 40 know this when he picked today's title? Vaguely. I wasn't consciously aware of that. But for most people, through most of history, and for most people in the world today, right, the definition of what is moral will overwhelmingly be how you treat members of your own tribe.
Tribe does not destroy itself. But now all these tribes live close together, and we must find a way to see all humankind as one species.
So now we get the liberal perspective on life. And I don't think this will work for most people. Right, there are some advantages to this idea. If you're living in a multicultural area, if you have a multicultural workplace, then taking on more of this ethos will be useful.
Not as a collection of tribes.
We're never going to transcend belonging to a tribe, belonging to a race, belonging to a specific family and extended family. So from my tribe perspective, right, this is utopian, what she's now saying.
Our survival depends upon this.
Right, I would argue that our survival primarily depends on our ability to fulfill our duties within our tribe.
The age of competition is ended.
All right, that strikes me as absolutely ludicrous.
The age of cooperation is here.
Sometimes, right, more often than tribalists and right-wingers and nationalists will think, right, that there is considerable virtue to cooperation at times.
If we do not find a way to cooperate, to extend that empathy to all humankind, then we will be the axe that chops our own roots.
All right, that just strikes me as utopian. The idea that we're going to find the empathy to extend to, all of humanity. I don't think that's realistic or even necessarily desirable.
As the media absolutely eviscerated him, Elon Musk remained this shadowy figure. What was he doing with Doge? How did this mega billionaire get all this power to abolish federal agencies and slash people's jobs? His mocking appearance on the cover of Time practically branded him, for the left, public enemy number one.
Are you ready to say no to Elon Musk?
And then suddenly the debut of the Elon show, the world's richest man emerging from behind the curtain in the Oval Office, taking questions from reporters. Now, clearly, he was playing defense after an avalanche of negative coverage. He needed to appear before the cameras and remind the country, hey, I'm the smart guy who made Tesla a success, who made SpaceX a success. I know what I'm doing here. And I'm a family man. Musk had his 4-year-old son named X by his side or in his arms or on his shoulders. What public figure would do that? The strangest thing of all, President Trump was in the shot, seated at the Resolute desk next to his closest buddy, and he occasionally would chime in. I cannot think of a time when Trump...
So normally Donald Trump insists that people wear a suit and tie in the White House, but when you're the world's richest man and you're doing work as valuable as Elon Musk, right, people are going to waive the rules for you.
Let someone else be the star of the show. Now, the gist of Musk's message, I am just doing what Donald Trump wants. We're finding billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse, and I have discovered a new enemy of the people.
If you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? We have this unelected, fourth unconstitutional branch of government, which is the bureaucracy, which has, in a lot of ways, currently more power than any elected representative. And this is not something that people want.
Now, cutting bloated government is popular, at least until people are personally affected. The media still have a lot of unanswered questions about Elon Musk's role, and we will get to that later. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz.
Howard Kurtz has a long, I would say, distinguished history of being fairly centrist. He was with the Washington Post for almost 3 decades.
As Donald Trump is waging numerous court battles over how far a president can go on spending without the approval of Congress, one phrase made its way from the major newspapers to constant cable news segments.
And tonight, there are warnings that the U.S. is dangerously close to a constitutional crisis.
Last night on CNN, they had a segment that read, "We are 3 weeks into Trump's second term, and there are warnings that the U.S. is dangerously close to a constitutional crisis." But they've been saying this so long that it's become the boy who cried wolf.
They might just defy rulings they disagree with to bring the often threatened constitutional crisis to a head.
We're basically on a collision course with a constitutional crisis.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Ben Domenech, editor-at-large at The Spectator and a Fox News contributor. And Megan Hayes, a former top official in the Biden campaign and White House. Ben, is this a constitutional crisis as various pundits and legal experts keep loudly proclaiming?
Howie, first off, it's good to have you back.
Thank you.
And I hope you're doing well.
Appreciate it.
And good to be on with you. No, this is not a constitutional crisis, and I think that the point that Dana was making in that segment that you posted is when you have someone cry wolf long enough, then you don't have the language for what happens when the wolf actually shows up. In this case, Elon Musk is the wolf, all right? And this is the kind of thing that
people view him that way.
A lot of people view him that way,
yeah.
Especially in this town. But the truth is that this is not a constitutional crisis, and we see what's happening in the courts as indicative of that. The courts are reacting to what Donald Trump is doing, what Elon Musk is doing. They're responding and they're appealing it. And one of the things that I think was key in this administration from the get-go, the reason that they're moving so fast and breaking things in the Silicon Valley way, is because I think they believe once these cases get up to the Supreme Court that they will win, that it will vindicate their perspective on the power of the executive, and they're starting the test from day one.
A SCOTUS strategy, Megan, but if the media keep pounding the drum.
So I was just watching while doing my morning exercises and listening to the Duran where they hosted John J. Mearsheimer. I was just watching Liverpool in the English Premier League, which is the #1 soccer league in the world. And Liverpool was playing the Wolves, the Wolverhampton Wanderers, better known as the Wolves. And it was fascinating and just absolutely nerve-wracking. The Wolves would build from the back. All right, so the goalkeeper would take possession of the ball, and then he'd just make a short pass, and Liverpool was pressing. And even when I don't have a strong emotional investment in a game, in fact, I am a Liverpool Football Club supporter because that way you never walk alone. they persisted with building from the back, and traditionally, when the goalkeeper would take possession, he'd just boot the ball downfield as far as possible. Now, ball possession is at a much higher premium in the highest leagues of soccer. But to watch a team build out of the back while under extreme pressure, knowing that the smallest mistake could very easily lead to a goal. And I'm supporting Liverpool, but like my heart's stopping watching the Wolves try to build from the back. It just seems like such a brave and risky strategy, but it's an increasingly dominant one. All right, putting this much of a premium on ball control, even though you're pressing, you're dribbling and passing right in front of your own goal. The slightest mistake will lead to an easy goal for the opposition. Whew. The Premier League has become so much more athletic over the past 2 decades, over the past decade in particular. And why has the Premier League become so much more athletic? And they measure it by measuring players' speeds. Right? Players are operating at full tilt at a much higher percentage than ever before. And the primary reason that the Premier League has become so much more athletic is it has become so much more black. Right? Blacks enjoy disproportionate success in the Premier League. Right? Their speed and their athleticism is completely changing soccer in the world's #1 soccer league. And the level of exertion and effort that we now see in the Premier League is just off the charts. It's far beyond anything we've seen before. It used to be that soccer players were smokers, right? That was very common. You'd see them dragging on a cigarette, but you don't see that nearly so much anymore because they have to run a lot faster and harder.
Congress and all of that, which will be litigated, but that doesn't seem to have stopped many of his critics.
I think fundamentally what we're witnessing here is the reaction of a town that has certain norms. And those norms are you don't expect this kind of thing to happen. You don't expect the president to come in and start actually slashing, cutting jobs, giving people buyouts, all these things that
and all at once.
Conservatives believe that the president has the power to do and have been arguing it for quite some time. But you don't expect to see that type of taking on of, you know, what Elon Musk is describing in the Oval Office is something that conservatives have traditionally referred to as the administrative state, this sort of leaderless bureaucracy that actually makes many of the decisions that matter to Americans. I think the Democrats are making a mistake here. Ruy Teixeira is a very smart guy, writes the Liberal Patriot Substack. He was making the point that on almost every single one of these issues where they're attacking it, Republicans and Elon Musk have not run yet into an issue where the majority of support from the people are on the side of Democrats saying they don't want these things to be cut. Now, that could change, obviously.
Well,
they could get into Medicaid. They could get into...
Right. This is so savvy by this new Trump administration. We would not have been blessed with this organized of a Trump administration if Donald Trump had been reelected. Right. We wouldn't have seen anything like this in Donald Trump's second term if it had begun in January of 2021. It's precisely because he was forced to take 4 years off and that he could plan that we're now at this stage. Now, I want to recognize the critics of the direction of this show. They say that my coverage of Donald Trump's new term is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Right, that's a Shakespeare quote from Macbeth. And people like Colin Liddell will say, I would expect they'd say that's a pretty cool encapsulation of my approach. I think this Donald Trump term is much more significant. I don't think it's just full of sound and fury signifying nothing, but it's important to articulate opposing perspectives.
Food stamps, they could get into things like that where a lot of the money really is. But as long as they're playing in this territory, they're still in the popular side.
But I have to get this in because Donald Trump just posted this defiant sentence on Truth Social. He who saves his country does not violate any law. And that's been criticized, Megyn, by even National Review. Richard Nixon said if the president does, it's not a...
Right. The U.S. Constitution is not a death sentence. The law is not a death sentence. That's such a Schmittian quote by Donald Trump. There is no constitution, there's no legal system, there's no political system that can anticipate all emergencies. And so sometimes our political system and every working democratic political system in the advanced world or any other world contains provisions for effectively constitutional dictatorship, where you have one person taking extraordinary measures during extraordinary times.
In the past is that it's almost impossible to fire bureaucrats.
That's true.
Even for cause, even when they violate all sorts of different things on HR issues and the like. And what they're proving with this is they're going to test the bounds of how much they're able to do when it comes to this. And they're doing it in a way that's having a complete ripple effect in Washington, D.C. This is like nothing I've seen an administration do.
Right. If you are operating out where the buses don't run no more, which is what much of this Trump administration is doing, it's so important to have the people on your side. But it's also true if you're a blogger or a content creator or you're doing anything risky. If you do risky things that enjoy popular support or do not attract huge, concentrated, effective opposition, right, you're going to be in much better shape. And so the Trump administration is generally operating in a savvy way by going to extraordinary efforts on behalf of things that are extraordinarily popular. And this is how I have consciously tried to operate as a blogger and vlogger. I try to frame things. I try to express things. I try to develop ideas. I try to break news stories that should at least meet with the tacit approval, if not the explicit approval, of most people who encounter what I have to say. Right? I want to be able to go from here and go for a walk down the street and maximize the opportunities that I'll have good relations with as many people as possible.
Before, in terms of the reaction from the bureaucracy that thought that they were just coasting along and that they would be completely fine, as they mostly were in the first Trump term.
Megan, there are already stories starting to pop up about fear-mongering.
Well, they are fear-mongering, I think, as we've said. But one of the things that I think is important to understand about this is that going after things like foreign aid.
So Ben Dominic is Mr. Meghan McCain. So he's more of a traditional conservative than a MAGA conservative. He likes a more interventionist foreign policy. He's more of a National Review conservative.
Are always going to be popular.
People hate foreign aid.
People hate foreign aid.
Yeah.
They hate and the sort of bleeding heart side of things is not going to win that argument. But your point is very well put, which is to say, once these things impact communities and states, Republicans start looking at those midterms and they say, Donald Trump isn't on the ballot. He's not at the top of the ticket. He's not necessarily going to be there to pull me across the way that he did, with a lot of these people who ran successfully in districts in blue states in particular.
So comes the man, comes the moment, or comes the moment, comes the man. New Jersey governor at the time, Chris Christie, had a golden opportunity to seize the Republican nomination for president in 2012. He did not seize that moment, and so he will never get to be president of the United States. All right, Barack Obama, by contrast, seized his moment, and then he went on to be a two-term president of the United States. So at certain times, you have the ability to advance and make much more of a difference in the world than at other times, right? And it's true in personal life as well. Men decide that they want to get married, and then they settle down with the woman that they're with when they decide to get married. Right? I think that's true more often than men have no plans to get married and then they meet a woman that they can't live without. I recognize what strikes me as a profound truth from both perspectives there, but know the situation. The situation will often shape your choice much more than any other consideration.
States like New York and California that ended up making the difference with the Republican majority. So when that starts happening, my question is, are these people going to be able to stand up to the admin, or are they just going to go along with this as they do with everything else and say, actually, I can't do that. I'm going to have to defend these cuts in my community and try to win using other methods, and that's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah.
So I haven't watched Cobra Kai. So I watched the original Karate Kid, but I haven't watched the updated version. So one big difference between U.S. government and government in other advanced nations is that the United States method of governance is much less smooth. right? In a parliamentary system, in a Westminster system, in a system such as what the United Kingdom has, England has, Australia has, New Zealand has, all right, you have a parliamentary system where governance comes out of the equivalent of the House of Representatives, and the Prime Minister is the representative of the ruling party. They assemble a coalition, or the one political party has the majority, and then that coalition can pretty much do what it wants. So the United States has a completely different system. The head of the Federal Reserve in the United States has far more power than the head of the national banking system in any other advanced economy. To the best of my knowledge, please correct me if I'm wrong, the United States Supreme Court has far more power than any other equivalent Supreme Court in the advanced world. The United States Senate has far more power than any other advanced economy in the world. And every county in California, I think there are about 52, has a public health officer who has the authority to stop any business, to enter any home, to deal with a public health emergency. So it's not just that our system sets up the presidency of the United States with dictatorial powers in certain areas of life, but overall in the administrative state, there are all sorts of people with quasi-dictatorial powers. When a policeman stops you, right, he effectively has dictatorial powers over you for a certain length of time. And politicians in the United States seem to have a much lower IQ than their English equivalents, and governance is just rougher and not nearly as eloquent in the United States. You have many more people in power who are simply inarticulate, certainly compared to their English peers. And so this is why people in Europe and Australia often look at the United States and its government as just a clown show. But just because something isn't smooth, and just because something isn't eloquent, and just because a country's leaders aren't using the language of the educated class, right, the careful, critical discourse that dominates those with an elite education, doesn't mean it's not effective. And the United States, over the past 150 years, has enjoyed its ups and downs, but since the 1880s, the United States has accounted for at least 25% of the world's GDP. Right? The United States has essentially been the world's premier economic power since at least the 1880s, and the world's premier military power since World War II. And we have a dominating set of alliances. And you're wondering, what does Stephen Kotkin have to say about all this?
Roughly since 1880. So that's spectacular. Almost 150 years of 25% of global GDP. That's with only 5% of global population. Then you've got the military. America's roughly 50% of global military, which is also spectacular. And then you got the quality issues of the American military and its expeditionary power. Then we can get into issues of soft power, America's attractiveness to places around the world. That's why our borders are under siege, in part, because we have an attraction to other places. We could get into the innovation ecosystem, which is right here outside our door. I think rather it's the envy of the world. All power is relative, so one has to account for American power vis-a-vis others, not just on its own terms. And so there could be shifts in the degree of American power. If another country comes along with a series of attributes that match or exceed American power, that would obviously change the equation. But by and large, it's a story that has held for a really long time, through thick and thin. One administration, another administration, one political party, another political party, one tax regime, a different tax regime. So policy has not created this power, and policy has not been able to suppress this power. Policy and politics have tremendous effects, obviously. We all understand that. But there is a bigger story here that transcends those conjunctural issues of whether the taxes are higher or the taxes are lower under any particular administration. We have our preferences. We can all argue for better policy or worse policy. But you've got something here that's amazing. The question is it going to go forward in the same way? And that, I think, should be the topic of our conversation today.
Okay, let's get Dooovid onto the show. Dooovid, you've been watching Cobra Kai, and you had some thoughts. So why don't you develop on what you've been saying in the chat?
Okay, well, actually, I didn't watch Cobra Kai. Just read and saw the highlights of the story arc, and I've been following it for a few years now. And I saw the closing up of the storyline, where the original Karate Kid story with Johnny Lawrence and Danny LaRusso, and kind of breaking away the white hegemony of early Los Angeles, of the white elites, and Cobra Kai coming back with like Johnny Lawrence being washed up and never recovering from his high school loss, but eventually reopening up Cobra Kai. But the main change is that he's always multicultural, and he shows no sign of like racism or any white identity. And basically the ending has Cobra Kai winning the national championship, and the antagonist eventually of the original Cobra Kai, Martin Kreese, dies in a fight with Terry Silver. And kind of like hinting like the bad element of Cobra Kai was Martin Kreese and Terry Silver. And I'd interpret it like Cobra Kai, it's written by Jews. It's actually written by Bubba, or former Chassid. But Cobra Kai was basically Kohanakai, and the Kohanist attitude. And so there's a redemption of Kahana, but the original Kahana element dies out, where now you have like a pro-multicultural, somewhat died down, where it's the winning formula is not Miyagi. The winning formula is in fact Cobra Kai, but just taking in elements of Miyagi, and the main villain ends up being like Terry Silver, the Gentile energy wealthy guy who goes down representing kind of the old white hegemony. And but there's a little aspect of the redemption of the white man, where Johnny Lawrence, Zipka, gets redeemed and is the leader that America deserves to win. However, he adopts a Hispanic son and marries his mother, and has a child, a half Hispanic child, and now he's the leader of a multicultural dojo, where he's still kind of the original badass that he was originally, but is tamed down with the Miyagi teachings. So I was interpreting that as an overview kind of for Hollywood narrative for the direction of a winning formula for America. You may be similar to the Marvel Universe or comic book, or typical, but you're getting some redemption. Like, yes, we do need, of course, white man in charge, because the other methods failed, and we do kind of need this badass Kahana strike first, because there really is evil out there, and the only way to defeat it is this violent temperament. But it's a little tamed down, and it's multicultural. So that that was my interpretation of how they tried to end it and tie it all together, and somewhat push forward this new kind of American multicultural hero that incorporates what used to be the unforgivable white man, but now has been somewhat redeemed, as long as you could still be the unforgivable, coarse white man, as long as you accept the multicultural coalition.
So were you surprised that Donald Trump increased his share of the vote among blacks, among Latinos in the past election?
No, not, because Trump, it was the false betrayal. Trump was always the multiculturalist. Trump, like I said in 2016, Trump rose to power. You could call it a psyop, because he was basically supported by Jews from the beginning. But Trump was always a pushback against white hegemony. Trump rose to power building clubs and golf courses that accepted minorities and Jews. So I always saw Trump as a multiculturalist, anti-racist in the extent where Trump will still use the coarse, non-political correct language, but Trump is essentially an anti-racist.
So I was just recalling a quote from Macbeth. Life is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury signifying nothing. And I think that's your analysis of the Trumpist excitement over his second term, right? You see a lot of sound and fury coming from the second Trump administration, but you don't believe it has great significance.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, this gentleman, I watched the Hoover Institute thing this Friday. What's the name of the guy who you had speaking?
Stephen Kotkin.
Yeah, I mean, so that was kind of like the sober analysis. Like, these guys are just WWE entertainers wearing face paint, and none of them are really competent leadership. And the question who's going to become competent, and that was always the nature of that. I said about democracy. The problem with democracy is democracy. It's about winning, and you have to win elections. And then once you win the election, you could govern. But the major flaw and problem in our U.S. system is, in fact, the democratic process that has led to the pageantry, the fakery, the current state of where we have someone like Trump, even on the right wing, where you don't have really competent people anywhere. Everybody's some sort of like Marvel comic book hero.
Now, Mearsheimer has done an abrupt about-face with regard to Ukraine. He didn't think that Donald Trump had any chance of settling the Ukraine war, and now he's completely changed his tune. He recognizes that Trump essentially has set the ground for an ending to the Ukraine war. And John Mearsheimer is a very accomplished public speaker. He speaks with great certainty and gravitas and makes very strong declarations. And I'm wondering if his great, effective public speaking style perhaps got in the way of his academic clarity, because he was so sure that there was no way that Trump could settle the Ukraine war. Now it appears that Trump is ending the Ukraine war. Any thoughts on anything I was just talking about?
No, I wouldn't agree with that assessment at all. I mean, I think because Mearsheimer does so much media and he's constantly asked to make predictions, he'll make predictions, and most predictions are wrong, but his overall analysis has been consistent, and I would say correct, which is limiting the power of the U.S. You're talking about the practical limitations and less focus on leadership and personalities, but of collective group interests. And I didn't see your point at all. Like, I think Mearsheimer almost never uses moral language, and see, especially, I mean, if you want to talk about Ukraine first, but especially in terms of Israel, I don't think any of Mearsheimer's critiques are moral at all. They're more practical. And in terms of Ukraine, I mean, he might use the word Trump because Trump is the president or some sort of interpretation, but I think he's more just talking larger factors where it wouldn't really matter who's president. These factors are going to determine the outcome that Ukraine is going to lose.
But Mearsheimer does use a lot of moral language with regard to Israel. That's about the only geopolitical situation where he's constantly invoking morality. I
don't see that. I would say Mearsheimer's kind of neutral. Like, he'll blatantly say Israel is genocidal, Israel's goal is ethnic cleansing, and he never says that's bad. And he usually admits that that's what's in Israel's best interest. And his basic argument is it's not working, it's failing. And his larger argument is that Israel's in a bad situation. How it conducted the war has put it in a worse situation. As where I listened to basically the majority of his regular content, and I can't think of. I mean, you might be able to play a clip, but I would almost say he's like me. He's completely amoral. And he'll just say, like, Israel's committing genocide because it's in their best interest. And he's not saying that genocide is bad because it's morally wrong. He's saying it's bad because it's not working.
Wait, why would you describe yourself as amoral?
Because I think morality can't be determined by humans. Like, if we die and God judges us, God will judge morality. And a human capacity to judge morals, like my opinion of whether it's good or bad or moral, amoral, is irrelevant. I would take the nihilist attitude, like if there is no God and there is no punishment after death, it doesn't. Morality is a construct of mind and largely worthless. And if there is a God, God will be the arbiter of morality, and our opinion of the matter doesn't matter.
Okay, this is a question out of left field with bearing no connection to anything we've previously discussed, but I'm kind of taken aback when I reflect on my emotional reaction to the death of many people I've known. My primary emotional reaction has been relief, because I had somewhat awkward relationships with several of these people who died, including my own father. I'm just curious, have you been close to people who've died? And if so, what was your emotional reaction upon their demise?
I'm almost always detached, so I rarely have an emotional reaction. I'm reading, like Mearsheimer is somewhat similar personality type, but I have a recognition of age, because like, yeah, a lot of contemporaries, people I know, like most of the rabbis, like I studied under, entertainment figures, like, even in the chess world, or people that were major figures in my youth have already started passing away. My parents are in their 70s. My hair is, turning white, and like I feel the health limitations of age and fear that, if something happens to my health, I may not recover. So in that sense, but I don't particularly have any emotional reaction, just like, wow, time really is passing. I'm getting old.
I hate negotiating relationships, which is why I kind of withdraw from so many. Yet all relationships require, a tremendous amount of negotiation. How are you with the negotiation part of relationships?
I'd say relatively good, because I take a non-confrontational, non-judgmental, similar to asking about morality, just practical, like my view of whether a person's good or bad doesn't really matter. And so I try not to think about it, try not to judge people. And I largely function well in a rules-based order, probably why, I became Hasidic and Orthodox Jewish. It was somewhat fit along with my personality type, or so I could quickly develop, like, just say, I used to say when I was more frum, like everybody has their Shulchan Aruch, like their customs and ways of interacting and unwritten rules. And relatively, I'm pretty good at figuring those out and according to them. And if that's in a personal relationship, just treat people the way they want to be treated, and just figuring out how they want to be treated, and or social settings. But largely, I'm an introvert. I'm detached. I spend most of my time by myself, reading, researching. But I think I navigate social situations relatively dispute-free, and figuring out kind of what type of rules, how should I comport myself within, like I'm still, I guess, an eccentric. I'm not going to, like I have my beard, I wear my yarmulke. Like I'm not like going to change myself, but I will largely just act according to a rules-based order that makes sense for navigating relationships.
Now, you spend a great deal of time, like me, in an abstract world. We both like reading, we love books, we love ideas, but this can often come at the cost of common sense, because we're living in an abstract world, abstracted from reality, and it can often come at the expense of relationships, because we get so caught up in ideas that we then run afoul of the sensitivities of other people. Do you have any reflections on the downsides of becoming absorbed in an abstract world from your own experience?
Yeah, I mean, just on the last point, I would add also that I rarely try to change people. I usually just accept people as they are. I might say, well, yeah, I mean, this might not be good for you, or not lead to results, unless I have a very close relationship where the person solicits my advice. I almost never give advice or try to change people or change situations, which leads to being able to more successfully navigate them. And I also take, life is short. There's a lot of trade-offs. You can't do everything, because you have to make decisions. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's downfalls to being abstract or being detached, as in terms of there's trade-offs and you can't do everything. And in terms like, well, yeah, I'm still unmarried. I don't have any children. I'm not really a close part of any social circles. I have friendships or connections that I've developed over the years, largely from being dependable, from having like, you know, sense of duty to do favors or help out, you know, people that I've relations with in their time of need, but not really a sense of attachment. So, you know, weeks could go by where, you know, no one calls me. I don't have any interaction. But I mean, if you're like, as like, because I'm not judging it like that's good or bad. I think that's just a lifestyle that has trade-offs. And because I value my research, I value my thought, I value trying to figure things out. I'm not sure if, I mean, it's kind of what you say with the racial realism or something. It's not really good or bad. It's just necessary trade-offs that you have to make in your life.
Okay, are there any other points that you'd like to make before I move on?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was more the Mearsheimer on Israel, because, like, I really don't think he is, I mean, maybe you just fundamentally disagree. I don't think he's making a moral criticism of Israel. I think he's making a practical criticism of Israel and like basically saying what they're telling you isn't true. And Israel is in deep, deep trouble. It's a very serious situation. Israel did not defeat Hamas. Israel did not defeat Hezbollah. Israel's plans moving forward are not realistic. And I think the point I made in the Twitter comment was Jews are extremely versatile and prepared to accept moral criticism. However, the practical criticism is very difficult. And I think that's, you know, you're an embodiment of that, where you want to say, oh, Mearsheimer is morally criticizing Israel, and therefore you're going to give your normal arguments of morality, as opposed to the practical criticism of what they're doing is just not working. And even the acceptance of saying, like, well, you're just, I'm not saying that in Mearsheimer's case, but, you know, you're just an anti-Semite, as opposed to saying, like, you're being self-destructive to yourself, not because it's morally wrong, but just because you're choosing an unwise path that's not working.
Okay, good to talk to you, Dooovid.
Okay, yeah, God bless. Have a good day.
Okay, take care. And Ricardo wants to know if we've weighed in on Elon Musk being revealed as the father of Ashley St. Clair's latest baby. I mentioned we took it on last night, but remember True Detective, season 1, time is a flat circle, right? That season 1 of True Detective was quite mind-blowing with regard to his attitudes towards time and meaning and purpose. So I do hold that John Mearsheimer has dramatically changed his tune with regard to Ukraine, and John Mearsheimer does use very different language with regard to Israel. Right? He often has a highly moralized critique of Israel, a hyper-moralized critique of Israel that he does not use on any other geopolitical situation of which I'm aware. And morality can become a sword, right? Morality can become a weapon to take people down. And so most of the time, the effective, evolutionarily adaptive use of morality is to strengthen your relations within your tribe, right? The notion that there's just one ethical standard for everybody, right? Relatively few people on Earth hold that, right? Most people believe in dual morality, and how you should treat your own group is the most important thing. And so if you invoke universal moral standards to condemn or to hurt your own group, that strikes me as usually a maladaptive strategy.
President Trump is determined to push his plan to forcibly relocate 1.8 million Palestinians from Gaza, despite the world's media saying it's unrealistic.
And would the Palestinians have the right to return?
No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing.
Taking press questions with Jordan's King Abdullah, who refused to accept the Trump proposal that his country and Egypt should take in many of the refugees. The president stuck to his plan.
And if they don't want to leave, how are you going to force them, Mr. President?
Oh, they're going to be great. They're going to be very happy.
Ben, the coverage of Trump's Gaza plan is that it's essentially dead. But he keeps talking it up as if it's moving forward.
Well, I think that we can talk about a lot of things and without them actually happening. And I think that one of the things that he's doing with this, though, is I believe he wanted to change the conversation into one that was forcing a lot of the other folks in the area, a lot of the folks in the region, to come forward with alternatives to his plan, putting something that is unrealistic out there that he wants to put forward as a.
Who's the best analyst of Donald Trump's brain? Like, who has the best track record? Who is the sharpest with analyzing the things that Donald Trump says and does, and what's really going on with Donald Trump? Right? That strikes me as a really important skill, because Donald Trump says so many outrageous things. Who is the best person at decoding Donald Trump? We need someone who decodes Donald Trump, who's not allowing partisanship, who's not allowing pro-Trump or anti-Trump biases to interfere. We just need an excellent decoder of Donald Trump. I mean, is Trump's Gaza plan just an extreme negotiating tactic? What does Trump really want? What does Trump really mean? I need the best Trump decoder. So tell me, please, who's the best Trump decoder? All right, let's have a look at Kip. He says, the Duran podcast, are they socialists? I don't know if they're socialists, but I do know that most foreign policy realists, and the Duran hosts are foreign policy realists, most foreign policy realists are on the left. Ask those same critics if things would have been better under Kamala. That's not particularly an important question. All right, Donald Trump won the presidency, and so their opinions on a mythical world that's never going to come into being is not of great significance. Colin had to know that Donald J. Trump was a bull in a china shop. His style wasn't going to change after 78 years. But the way Donald Trump has governed in the second Trump administration is very different from the first administration. America's loss of vitality is ultimately terminal. Compared to who? Right? Who has more vitality than the United States right now? Kip says, I'd rather go down with a ship without all the illegals hanging around the decks and stealing our lifeboats. Concept of a vocation meant something to those Calvinists that once worked in our factories, but the yearning to complete tasks in a godlike manner as God's earthly extension is long gone. It's not long gone for those who get a significant amount of their meaning in life from work. Men naturally tend to build up the importance of the work that they do. That enables men to participate in their work with much more vigor and enthusiasm. So you'll see in other countries such as Australia and England, right, workers put much more effort into their hobbies than they do into their work. But Americans, by and large, are about the hardest working, most productive people in first world economies. And so I think this sweeping denunciation here by Kip is wrong. Trump allowed Jews into Florida clubs when others were excluding them. Trump would say, isn't their money green too? Yes, Donald Trump has a long, largely positive relationship with the Jewish community, and he tends to see them in realistic and pragmatic ways. Has Elon confirmed Ashley St. Clair's story, or is she just trolling for attention? Well, I don't think that Ashley St. Clair would come out and say that Elon Musk is the father of her baby. I mean, there's just so many evidence, right? That he is the father. He's provided her with hundreds of thousands of dollars, with security, with a wonderful living situation. All right, all evidence points towards this being a true story.
Goal is oftentimes meant to increase the Overton window in terms of, look, you've got to come up with a better solution, or you've got to come up with an alternative. That being said, that alternative has yet to form in a real serious way. There's discussions about it. There's been some reporting about what is going on in terms of perhaps offering alternative approaches. But I think effectively he has changed the conversation, and we're going to have to see where things go from here.
Trump had said yesterday that all the hostages needed to be released. Now he says it's up to Israel. Megan, what about that? I mean, there he is with King Abdullah, who doesn't want to take of Ukraine by saying he supported NATO membership for Ukraine, and also talking about the possibility of a minor incursion from Russia. I'm sure that caught your attention.
Right. President Biden never said that they were ready for entry into NATO. He made clear on multiple occasions throughout the time that he was at the White House that they were not ready for their membership into NATO, that they were working towards something. And I think that, you know, they had an opportunity to have other countries enter NATO.
Supposedly providing $50 million in condoms to Gaza.
First of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000. I mean, we will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct any mistakes.
And what about his scrutinizing Pentagon spending when his SpaceX has billions in military contracts?
I'm not the one, filing the contract. It's people at SpaceX or someone who will be putting for the contract.
Well, only in the insane liberal clown posse world.
So there are seasons in a man's life, and for a normal man, right, he spends his years 25 to 40 building his kingdom, almost with that as his overwhelming focus. And then as he moves through his 40s into his 50s, he starts expanding the amount of time he spends with family. And then moving through his 50s into his 60s, he starts thinking much more in terms of communal service, and he needs much more recognition. He moves into his king stage, in the words of Alison Armstrong. And so Elon Musk is 52. He's not going to be as mono-focused as he was in his 20s and 30s into his 40s, right? He's now in his king stage. He wants to be recognized. He wants to make a public contribution. And men, as they move through their 50s into their 60s, right, their focus expands from building their kingdom to wanting to make a wider contribution and to be recognized. And understanding these seasons in a man's life, I think it's important to understand the evolution of Elon Musk and the evolution of Donald Trump.
Would volunteering to save taxpayers billions of dollars, which is what Musk is doing, could in any way be considered wicked?
The government has access to your Social Security numbers. What does he think Elon's going to do with your Social Security number? What is he going to, like, open up a credit card in your name and, like, max it out at Best Buy?
But Trump critics denigrated the Musk's appearance.
Elon Musk and his co-president Donald Trump have spent the first 3 weeks of their presidency attempting a full assault on the separated powers of the Constitution. Full stop.
A picture of presidential subservience, the likes of which we have never seen. The most powerless image of a president of the United States ever created by a camera.
Joining us now in Connecticut, Charlie Gasparino, senior business correspondent for Fox Business Network, and here with me, Molly Ball.
Well, he was there and they were there, it seems like. That seems to be the beginning and end of it, you know. But it was quite a spectacle, wasn't it? It was such an incredible scene.
So Molly Ball writes for the Wall Street Journal, and she is one of our premier modern political reporters and analysts.
The president looking on, I'm almost at a loss for words. Charlie, what did you make of just the sheer spectacle of it, the theater of it, right down to Musk, appearing with his 4-year-old son?
I like the fact that reporters are harping on the thing that Elon said, well, I made some mistakes. Like, reporters never make mistakes, ever.
Well, yeah,
ever.
We all know that.
So seeing Elon Musk with a child and having a young child enter such a major public event and discussion, kind of reminiscent about how Orthodox Judaism operates, right? There are just children everywhere. And many, I think, women in particular, just really enjoyed this spectacle of this rambunctious 4-year-old in the middle of an important discussion. And you even see the 4-year-old telling Donald Trump, the president, to shush. So Donald Trump is putting on an amazing reality show.
Listen, I think this is great. It's hard for me to find, as a reporter, to find any sort of any outrage here. So let's be clear here. He's totally transparent. Everything he finds, he puts on the web. We have a $2 trillion budget deficit, by the way. If you notice all this hysterical talk about him usurping presidential powers, and it sort of leaves out the little elephant in the room that we have a $2 trillion budget deficit.
So why is Donald Trump so energized? Because he is connecting with people, the American public, a substantial number of them, connecting with Elon Musk, connecting with his staff. And so his meetings are not like a traditional presidential calendar where he goes from one meeting to another meeting. Instead, he just keeps people on and they just roll and they build. And you want to roll and build through your day, right? You want to get going and have some sort of connection with your spouse, your kids, right? Some shared basis for connection. So if your kid is primarily into video games, noting something about video games will get your day off to a good start with your kid. If your daughter is primarily about Jane Austen novels, asking her about the latest Jane Austen novel that she's reading will get your day off to a great start. If your wife is really into yoga, some remark about yoga is more likely to get your day off to a good start. If your wife enjoys morning sex, having morning sex will get your day off to a great start. And then you roll into the office, right? And let's say that your receptionist is really into knitting, right? Some remark about what she's knitting will get you a shared basis of connection, and then you'll get energy from all these interactions, and they'll just keep building and building, and that will give you the strength to get so much done. You move then from the receptionist to your assistant, who is really into science fiction. And so as you walk in, like, hey, Joe, what's the latest science fiction novel that you're reading? And then at work, your supervisor is a passionate New York Yankees fan. So some comment about the New York Yankees, right? Knowing what people are passionate about. And Donald Trump is so good at that. Hillary Clinton was asked, why did she attend Donald Trump's last wedding to Melania? And she said, because Donald Trump is so much fun. So what makes people fun is because they connect with you. When I was a kid and my sister wasn't living at home most of the time, I would always look forward to my sister returning home, or we'd visit my sister because she was so much fun. What made her so much fun is that she'd go to great effort to get on the same page with me, and she'd be interested in what I was interested in. And so from that connection, right, we both built up an energy release. And someone who drains the energy is someone who has no desire to connect with you. So Donald Trump wants to connect with America, so he's going to Daytona 500 today. He went to the Super Bowl last week. He's putting on an amazing reality show with his presidency. He seems to be on the same page with his press secretary. He seems to largely be on the same page with Elon Musk. And so he clues into people and what animates them. And that's the primary source of his energy.
36 trillion in debt. We have a bond market that's negatively reacting to that lately. This is necessary. If we don't do this, we could face fiscal Armageddon at some point. No one's bringing that up. And by the way, aside from the typical MSNBC viewer, is the American people love this.
Let's get Kip onto the show.
Here's where
Kip,
journalism fell
what's
down
going
on the
on,
job,
man?
Howie.
Hey, man, I'll tell you who animates me. Luke freaking 40. What you doing
Thanks,
today,
bro.
buddy?
I'm fired up, ready to roll.
And that's what it's all about. You get me thinking about things, you know. I was, real fast on the vitality bit. We'll move on. My birthday was Valentine's Day, so I've got that, you know how birthday week is. You have all those regrets and woulda, shouldas, and couldas and stuff kind of that won't go away.
I don't experience that very much. It's quite muted. I think because I spent my 20s in bed with chronic fatigue syndrome and just my life just falling apart and dissolving in front of my eyes. And so one gift of that is that regret does not play a big role in my life most of the time. It may well up occasionally. I'm not immune from it, but your description of birthdays does not resonate with me, except maybe at about 10%, 20% of the level you described. I may be completely deluded, but back to you.
Well, I was just going to say, before we got to that, what got me thinking about, vitality is because I looked around and I saw that, man, England and Britain's looking bad now. They're almost what you might want to call hopeless. And I noticed the people like in Australia seem to be thinking not quite that bad, but there's a little bit of despair. Canada, and I kept thinking, what's going on here? And I don't know. I was thinking, I went back to like following those Jews, you know, got kicked out of Spain, went to Portugal, got kicked out of Portugal, went to the Netherlands, started rocking in the Netherlands and England. But those finance tricks, mercantilism, that kind of stuff, I don't think it just plugs and play with anybody. That's what I was telling you about. I think we're maybe not given that Calvinist.
Okay, yeah, I got a quick thought. Yeah, I got a quick thought. So Jews do better in individualist societies. Jews do better in Anglo-Saxon societies. They do less well in corporate societies, meaning Roman Catholic and Islamic societies. So any city in the United States that is dominated by Catholics tends to have huge amounts of corruption. I can't think of any one Roman Catholic country where the majority of its citizens identify with the Roman Catholic Church as their primary religion that does not have huge corruption levels. So Anglo-Saxon societies tend to be individualist. They tend to believe in universal morality. So they are more open than pretty much any other society. And Jews thrive in societies formed by Anglo-Saxons more than any other society of which I'm aware. And so the freedom that Anglo-Saxon societies provide and the relative openness compared to other societies just creates highways for advancement and growth and wealth for Jews. Also, Jews tend to have stronger family structures than Anglo-Saxons. They tend to have a more socially advantageous personality. So they tend to be more outgoing than Anglo-Saxons. They tend to wear their heart on their sleeve more than Anglo-Saxons. And the more, if you're more outgoing than introverted, that in and of itself will create a more advantageous society. They tend to have higher conscientiousness levels than Anglo-Saxons, and that again will provide a substantial advantage for success in life. They tend to have higher verbal IQs than Anglo-Saxons, and so success in life is not just a matter of IQ, it's also a matter of personality type. Back to you.
Yeah. I wasn't really talking about the Jews. I was just trying to think in my mind, the stew of people that had kind of done what led up to the Industrial Revolution. And then I think about like those dudes 50, 60, 70 stories up in New York City throwing hot rivets at one another, just standing on steel girders. The people at OSHA would just lose their mind. But that was 100 years ago. Those people they didn't even have ropes around them or anything. So I don't know that I'm still not sure what caused the loss of vitality. It could be something right underneath our nose, like plastic or who knows, something they put in tooth fillings. I don't know. I just know that we don't.
What's an empirical basis for your claim that Americans have suffered a loss of vitality? For example, one argument against your claim is that America's percentage of the world GDP has substantially increased over the past 20 years.
Well, young people, they won't work in a factory now. I mean, that's they won't do the things that people before them would do. And I was thinking these Victorian people and early 20th century people, I got to kids were sort of like chattel property. Did you notice that in the 1800s, orphanages were full of kids, and
that's decreased since the legalization of abortion.
Right. But the kind of people that it put out into the community, like these places, these kids, I'm talking like 1840s, 1860s, and all through the late 1700s. The particular one I'm thinking about that I'm going to mention to you was actually in England. But these kids would be indentured servants. They would be in a 10-year apprenticeship doing the particular one I was watching the other day was cotton, working on the cotton looms or whatever, and they would get these cotton infections in their eyes, and they would get leeches and put the leeches all around their eyes, and these kids, I guess, eventually this style of work of factory work, having kids ranging in age from 9 to 19 generally, it was changed out because it was easier to have free labor, just people coming in and work. instead of you having to house them and feed them and, do all this other stuff for them. But man, what kind of a tough person did that create, having so many people who were indentured servants from the age of 9, Luke Ford? You want to speak to that if you can?
Well, that was adaptive to that particular situation, and obviously there are some advantages to that, but there are also other advantages to kids staying longer in school, and so I don't want to go back to that. And
right.
And I don't see any reason why kids should want to work in factories if they prefer to work in an office or work from home. So there are many other avenues that are open to people. Also, the world is much more volatile, so spending 10 years to prepare for a profession that may not be there at the end of those 10 years is a really bad bet. And the bigger question to me is, are there any other countries with more productive and harder working workforces than the United States? And China may work hard, but its workers are half as productive as Turkish workers, and about 1/3 as productive as American workers. So American workers are the most productive in the world. So I don't see any other country where I'd want to emulate them with regard to productivity.
Right. Well, who knows? Maybe we'll be scooping up all the workers for our factories out of Bosnia and Croatia and Herzegovina and all that. If they play basketball so well, maybe they can do everything well. It's just, that those people were so chiseled, they were so hard, and believe it or not, those 10 years indentured servitude as an apprenticeship in those cotton factories was their parents thought they were doing them a favor because it was better than Birmingham and Manchester at that time. And, just the grimness of those places. I'm sure you've seen history documentaries of how grim those places were and that, but still they toiled, like I said, like they must've had some like godlike, task where vocation brought them somehow close to godliness or something, and we're just gone. And I don't think
I think you're romanticizing the past. I don't think for most of them that kind of work was bringing them closer to God. I don't think the past was nearly as connected to God as you believe. I don't think that they felt like they were doing God's will when they were 9 years old and working in hellacious conditions in a cotton mill. And I'm just curious, like what needs does it meet in you to romanticize the past and to piss on the present?
I'm not. I'm trying to explain to you that there was a series of events. Probably it takes a while, but when Darwin put out that book or whatever, eventually it finally got through to him that if what he's saying is true, then that chain going all the way back from them, all the way back to Adam and Eve, and that specialness that they had, it probably eroded that. But I didn't want to shit on America or anything like that. I was mainly just wanting to kind of talk regrets, and it sounds like you don't have them. I don't know if this makes me a bad person, but I sat back on my birthday waiting to see who would call. We live in a world where everybody wants to send text, but Did
you get the flowers that I sent you?
No.
Damn, no, I didn't know what's wrong. I mean, I spent like $50 sending you flowers and telling you how much I loved you, bro.
But that wasn't because I got the flowers you sent me because I've been crippled for the past 4 weeks, but not the birthday flowers. Did you send two?
Yeah. Why? I sent 2 batches of flowers. I'll have to find out what happened. But why are you crippled? What happened? What's the problem? Talk to Dr. Luke.
I don't know, Luke. This is the problem: is I didn't really do anything to cause the crippling. The best I know is I got a 90-pound dog that lays on my knees sometimes, and I lay on my side, and she'll kind of put her head right there on my knee, and I woke up and the fucking knee wasn't hardly working the next morning. So apparently I adjusted my way of walking, and my dad says, well, sounds like that called something he called plantar fasciitis or something. So anyway, I had this nasty cause and effect thing that just kept me.
So you got knee
laid up.
problems that are crippling you.
Yeah. Well, you used to run. You know, when you used to run, if you try to run too fast, too early, you get that hamstring feeling in the knee part of your leg.
Yep. So I got the solution, bro. I got the
What's
solution. Your hamstrings are too tight, so don't try to stretch them. That's not going to work. You need to release them. And I need you to check out this book. It's called Treat Your Own Knee by Robin McKenzie. So Robin McKenzie is a New Zealand physical therapist, and a few decades ago, he was working with one patient, and the next patient came in early. And so McKenzie told him, look, go lie down over here, and I'll get to you when I finish with my current patient. And when he finished his current patient, went to the next one, the guy he told to lie down, he was lying in this really bizarre position. But the guy, he woke him up, but the guy had come in for back pain. But by lying in this bizarre position, his back pain disappeared. And so from that, McKenzie built his research on the power of different positions to release us of unnecessary muscular pain. So when your hamstrings are tight, they're pulling on the patella. All right, that when you have muscular spasms or tight muscles, they're pulling on your bone structures. And you can go to a chiropractor and he can put your bones back into place. But because your muscles are so tight, they're just going to be pulled back out of kilter. And so you have to address the unnecessary muscle spasms, tightness that you've got, and particularly with hamstrings. So they need to be freed up. But what is also probably going on is that you have weakness in and around your hamstrings. And so when one muscle set is weak, then others have to compensate. And then that often works to your detriment. So often people try to stretch hamstrings or release hamstrings, but the main problem is weakness. So for example, I get this with my left elbow. If I don't keep up certain exercises, certain muscles that I have are weak, and then other muscles pull on my bones, and I get all sorts of left elbow pain. So I have to strengthen certain muscle sets on a regular basis, or I'm going to get muscle pain. And I bet that you have certain muscle sets in and around your hamstrings that are weak, which are leading to other muscles having to do work that they're not designed to do, which is causing you pain. Also, your hamstrings may be tight, one, because they're weak, or two, they're just tight. And until you learn to free and release those hamstrings, and stretching is not going to do it, they're going to keep pulling and distorting on your bones, including the patella bone in your knee. And so Dr. Ford says, go to YouTube and look into, put in the problem that you're having and look for the exercises. And there's just this excellent, $7 book, Treat Your Own Knee by Robin McKenzie. So I have often had knee problems, and it's almost always because my hamstrings are too tight, and my hamstrings are often too tight because they're too weak. And so I have to do certain exercises to strengthen muscles in and around my knees. So, for example, I sit on a chair and I put these 10-pound weights around my ankles, and then I just lift my leg up from the ground to straight in front of me. And it's just taken away all my knee problems. I had plantar fasciitis problems in my feet that I spent thousands of dollars of physical therapy on. Then there was an article in the New York Times that prescribed an exercise for plantar fasciitis. I started doing this exercise, and the problem just went away, never returned. I've saved thousands of dollars in physical therapy by dealing with my plantar fasciitis just with this one problem. In addition, the last time I went to a regular physical therapist, I saw that he was using a tool called the Activator. And it gives like a few pound, 5 pound, 10 pound impact with a rubber end on it. And I bought a $150 guide to the Activator, so an ebook for chiropractors and physical therapists, and I spent $100 on the Activator, and I've never had to go back to a regular physical therapist since. I just go to the guide and I just look at the pictures for whatever problem is ailing me, and the Activator helps locate the sources of unnecessary tension and compression, and with a few clicks of the Activator often can release them. So I probably saved myself well over $10,000 just from use of the Activator. Pass.
I know that Activator thing you're talking about almost looks like an oversized hypodermic needle, right? It's a big, like a plunger thing. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Man, Luke, you and I are 100%. We're 180 degrees opposite when it comes to stuff like that. Because I would never do that $150 thing or whatever. But
how much would you pay not to be crippled? Like you've been crippled for how long? Like to me, if we were trading places, I'd be willing to spend up to $1,000 not to be crippled. How much would you be willing to spend to not be crippled?
God dang, you sign up for everything, brother. I know. Trust me, I know.
But my question was, how much would you be willing to pay to not be crippled? I'd be willing to pay up to $1,000. What would you pay? Nothing?
$9.99. I thought about this one time. It said if you got in trouble, if you ever got in trouble and you were facing like 10 years in jail, and let's say you had like $1 million, would you like just say, fuck it, I'm just going to take it easy for 10 years in jail, maybe get out in 5? Or would you spend $1 million to keep your ass from going to jail? And I'd sit there and thought about it one night. I said, it's plan B. You spend $1 million to not do a day in jail.
But how's it serving you? You've been crippled for a month, and with a few exercises, you would be completely out of that and living a normal life again.
You're right. My kneecap, I was walking down a frozen gangplank to get to my houseboat maybe in 2014, 2015. And I took a step on a frozen spot and hurt my knee real bad there. And I noticed at that moment, not only did I hurt my knee and it took a few months for it to heal up, but it had changed the way my right foot makes plants, because it started wearing the treads on my shoes in a funny way. So anyway,
wait, no, there's no anyway. Like you develop compensations to deal with this problem, but those compensations are just layering dysfunctional patterns of use of yourself on top of other dysfunctional patterns. And so as you age, you are becoming more and more dysfunctional, more and more limited, and there are relatively easy solutions. Pass.
Are we talking about mental or physical now? That
physical, but there's no separation. The mental is affected by the physical is affected by the mental. They're both constantly affecting each other. There's no physical kip that is separated from the mental, because the mental is part of your physical mechanism.
Right. Well, I don't have faith in the people in white coats the same as you do, and I wouldn't make your listeners put up with the, reasons why or whatever. But
you've got a dysfunctional strategy. You've got a curable problem, and you're not dealing with it. Like you had that fire alarm beeping for months. So wake up and smell the coffee, Kip.
Man, I did it again. A couple of nights ago, I was on the phone with Elliot, and another one started right up. So I've had to do that twice now, and it may be a month or two. This is awful. But the whole knee thing, I forget what my odometer says. I keep getting older, not younger. And every once in a while, I was trying to overdo it, and that knee would remind me that you're sort of damaged goods. You can pretend everything's okay, but you can't go 100% anymore. And that was what's so quirky about this last time, is I left the gym almost a year ago to heal up, and then all of a sudden re-hurt the thing just in my sleep overnight. So, that just tells me it's over for me. But
why would you just accept it's over when you just need to do a few exercises to regain use of yourself? I almost never have physical pain or dysfunction. 95% of the time I am pain-free, and I can do everything physically that I could have done over the past 40 years. Why would you just accept that?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I just use it. It took me 4 or 5 days of not being able to sleep before I was willing to take some leave. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh my God, this stuff is like magic. But then on day 6, I took it a step further and started ace bandaging up the knee and ace bandaging up my ankle. And I felt like $1 million, but it still it's taken 3 or 4 weeks for it to heal. The feeling gets better each day, but I can tell just going down and doing a load of laundry, I come up just in severe pain. So whatever it is.
And it could cost you your life, right? There are times when if you're at a low level of function, right, that's it, right? There are times that life demands that you be at a premium level of function.
Yes, sir. I'll have to mow grass here in a couple of months. Yeah. I'm trying to heal up. I want to. It's what you get here is you get a domino effect because I always eat a little bit more than I should. So like I was swimming, but like, the knee hurts. Let me ratchet that back down to walking. So then I start walking, but there again, now there's 4 weeks I can't do walking. And now I'm like, oh shit, you might be going over 200 pounds. You know what I mean? So you gotta, either I've got to eat like a bird, I might have to start eating like a bird until my knee truly gets better, or I'm just going to have to start doing some low level stuff in the gym because I'm ready to get in the gym.
Right, but if you do low-level stuff that simply ingrains these bad habits that you've developed, you're only going to make your problem worse. So you're not going to think your way out of this. You're going to have to look for help from somewhere, whether it's YouTube or books or pamphlets or a good physical therapist or whatever. You are not going to find your way out of this on your own. But I had an additional point. Doggone it! It was going to change your life. What the hell was it? Oh, yeah, here it is. I think there's a Jewish, goyish difference here. So if you attend a synagogue and the temperature is 2 degrees too hot, people will complain. And if the temperature is 2 degrees too cool, people will complain. While in the Seventh-day Adventist church that I grew up in, suffering is being Christ-like, and to be human is to suffer, and so you don't complain if it's too hot or too cool. But the Jewish attitude to suffering is suffering sucks. If there's something you can do to ameliorate it, right, you do it. And so I think I've taken this on, and so if I've got an ache or a pain and I don't understand what's happening, I immediately go research it and find the exercises or the procedures that I need to do to ameliorate this problem. And if I can't figure it out, then I reach out for help, because I have adopted this Jewish attitude that suffering sucks. I think you have the goyisha attitude that suffering is just a part of life, and you just suck it up.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that one reason that Dooovid and me and Elliot Blatt and probably a few others are probably never going to find girlfriends and wives after that is because we talk to you every once in a while, and it reminds us what having a girlfriend or a wife was like. The needling in the best way possible. You're doing it in the best way possible. You know what I mean?
Right. No wife would put up with your attitude towards your various injuries. They'd say, get it fixed.
You're right. But can we? I've taken up enough of your time, but can we just spend a minute on regrets? You don't have any regrets when the birthday comes along?
I do, but and maybe I'm self-deceived here, Kip. But yeah, I have regrets. But when I started taking those beef organ capsules 2.5 years ago, and my health dramatically improved within 2 weeks, right? I experienced a great deal of pain that my previous 45 years of weakness and brain fog was unnecessary. Like, can you imagine the pain in the morning that I went through when I got diagnosed and medicated for ADHD, and I found by taking a pill 90% of my self-destructive impulses went away? Can you imagine the amount of mourning that I went through, that the previous 57 years of my life unmedicated for ADHD were an unnecessary hell? And then when I entered and started getting recovery from underearning, so prior to entering a 12-step program for underearning, I'd never earned over $45,000 in a year. And then within 15 months, I was earning twice that. And so the sense of loss that I had when I look back on my lifetime of underearning was just enormous, right? So I went through serious mourning with regard to that. And then so too when I got some sexual sobriety, when I look back on the devastation of my past because of my inability to operate in a sane manner with regard to my love life and my sex life, again, tremendous sense of devastation. But primarily, I look back on the past through the framework of, given the tools that I had at the time, I could not have acted differently. Now, I may be self-deceived, right? Maybe I'm mourning a whole lot more than I'm copping to, but that is the primary way that I understand the past, that given who I was at the time, I could not have acted differently. Back to you.
You intrigued me with that Underearners Anonymous. My God, you'd sign up for any 12-step, but it intrigues me.
But what about it intrigues you? You don't think it's a real thing?
Were they just telling you that you were settling for less, that you were worth more than that? I mean, what did it come down to? What was the fortune cookie answer for what those people were trying to instill in Luke 4 to get him?
Yeah. So these are the symptoms of underrunning, and some of them spoke to me much more than others. So time indifference, we put off what must be done. We do not use our time to support our own vision and further our own goals. That only spoke to me on a mild basis. But here's one that really hit me. Idea deflection. We compulsively reject ideas that could expand our lives or careers and increase our profitability. I have had idea deflection in part because the pain of accepting a great idea from outside of myself and recognizing that the way I'd been doing things was so immense that it made me suspicious of good ideas, because then it was difficult for me to process the suffering that came from recognizing that I should have taken other people's advice. Throughout my life, people have told me I should eat meat, and they were right? Or the people closest to me for 40 years were telling me I should eat meat, and I compulsively rejected their ideas, and that could have saved my life. I would be a married man with kids and a thriving career if I'd only listened to them. I wouldn't have had the debilitating weakness and brain fog that I've had over the past 40 years if I'd only listened to them. So there was just so much suffering that I experienced from not following advice. Listening to Art Bell, who's a regular on the chat here, he says, apply for monetization on YouTube. I'd given up on YouTube. I'd given up on making money on YouTube because its censorship standards just seem too extreme. There's no way they're going to monetize me. But Art Bell says, go ahead, try it again. This other person who does an edgier channel than yours is monetized. So I clicked, reapply for monetization. Damn it, it came through. I'm just absolutely shocked. And I could have probably done this months ago, but I needed Art Bell to push me. Here's another symptom that really speaks to me: compulsive need to prove. Right? I have constantly felt driven to reprove my worth and to show people who shunned me and rejected me and made fun of me that I'm really a good person. So my life has been ruined by this compulsive need to prove. Exhaustion, right? I would often exert myself, exhaust myself, and then cease work. Giving away my time. Yeah, I was a compulsive volunteer for many things and did not use my time wisely. I have had a lifetime of undervaluing and underpricing myself, and it has been very hard for me. I've never asked for a raise, for example. Isolation. Right, I have spent much of my life choosing to work alone when it would serve me much better to work with other people. Physical ailments, sometimes out of fear of being larger exposed, we experience physical ailments. The more isolated I am, the crappier I feel. The more connected I am, then the better I feel. Not following up on opportunities, leads, or jobs that could be profitable, that was a problem. And stability boredom, this is another big problem I had. We create unnecessary conflict with coworkers, supervisors, and clients, generating problems that result in financial distress. So I heard these symptoms of underearning, and I recognized I had a problem. Back to you.
Yeah, I imagine once the remonetization starts, here's an idea: go topless, wear pasties, but keep the show highbrow. See if that draws in more looky-loos. You know what I mean? Me and Elliot's still going to be here, but you know what I mean? Do something like outlandish, but then also keep it highbrow at the same time. I don't know. I wonder if anything in that 12-step cure-all stuff mentioned somebody like me, which I described myself once to Mr. Blatt as a Big Mac maker. No matter what job I was doing, I would they'd say, this is the job description. And I would just reduce it down to just making Big Macs, just, and not get necessarily creative, about anything. I would just do the job, just do the job, just do the job. But the thing in finance is you're working somewhere, and 1 to 2 years into the job, they always get bought up by somebody else. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, let me jump in while I've got a thought. So there's nothing in 12-step that says cure all. and for example, there's a principle that the credits don't transfer. So just because you get sober from alcohol doesn't mean that you're going to be sober from marijuana, doesn't mean you're going to be sober financially or with regard to your love life. So people typically start 12-step work with an alcohol or drug addiction program, and then they move to getting sober in their sex and love life. But the credits don't transfer, right? You have to begin anew and work a new program. And then after people get sober with drugs, alcohol, and their sex life, and they typically want to get sober with regard to their finances. So I've known a lot of people who had out of control drug and alcohol addiction problems. They got sober with the alcohol, they got sober with the drugs, they got sober with their sex life, they got married, they got sober with their financial life, they had kids, they bought a home, they developed a thriving business. But the credits don't transfer. You can have all of that and then have a food problem. And all the credits that you've earned from your previous 12-step program are not going to cure your compulsive overeating. And so you have to begin anew. So the notion that 12 steps is a cure-all is not found in 12-step programs. That's your projection onto the programs. Back to you.
Yeah. Okay, well, I wanted to talk about regrets, but we kind of veered off.
No, jump into it. Talk to me about regrets and what's your attitude.
Well, just the regrets of, like, I was sizing up the fact of I got rid of a best friend like 8 years ago, and like 6 or 7 months after the fact, he tried to reconnect with me, and then I guess my replacement best friend just told me this week that he was at the VA and saw my old best friend. So it got me thinking about it because it was on my birthday, and it was like, we were best friends, thick as thieves, but he had become, I mean, the most hardcore alcoholic you can be, to where you just start up in the morning drinking at like 7 a.m. And then I found that I was being his enabler. You ever heard of that term? Enabler?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure if your description is accurate, that you did the right thing in separating yourself. Is he now sober?
My friend said, my new best friend said he was looking scraggly. He's like, I know that guy. He's like, I know that guy. He kept mentioning you. He kept mentioning Charles, which is another friend of ours. It's now dead. And he said, and then it's Marty. I was like, oh yeah. And then it reminded me, oh shit, I dropped him, and he wanted to reconnect his friends, and he looked like a sad puppy dog when I rejected him at the gas station. But I don't know. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Wait 5 years and check on them again? I don't know what you're supposed to do.
No, if unless someone wants to recover, then I think you should separate yourself from anyone in compulsive addiction. I mean, from your self-reporting, you're high all the time. So I would not allow you into my real life as long as you're smoking marijuana. Right? There's no one in my real life who's high all the time. I would not allow someone who's drunk much of the time into my real life. I would not allow a compulsive debtor or underearner who's not on a path to recovery into my real life. So I think keeping up boundaries against people with compulsive, destructive levels of addiction is vitally important.
You know, my man was bad off when one day he woke up crying and asked me to take him down to one of those 72-hour, like where they check you out deals. Mm-hmm. And I went down when we spent like Sunday morning down at those places. God help those people. They're open like 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And she hands him a questionnaire, and they get to there's a bunch of questions, but only one of those freaking questions matters, Luke. The one that says, are you a threat to yourself or others? And he answered no to that. And she said, well, I can't take him. And I said, you had some sort of moment of clarity today. She went through the whole damn list with you. She got down to the magic question, and you told her you're not a threat to yourself or others. But yet you told me this morning crying you were going to kill yourself. That qualifies as a threat to yourself or others. And he told the lady, well, maybe he should answer differently on that question. But I mean, 72 hours later, they let him out, said he was fine. And it took him about 72 hours more later, and he was hardcore, waking up, drinking all day. Just drink till you pass out, wake up, and start drinking again. So it's just ridiculous. But yeah, I did the same thing I told you about my crazy-eyed sister who I hadn't talked to since 2014, and I kind of feel bad because she was one of the calls, one of the texts that I got on my birthday, and I didn't send anything back to her because this is the same woman that's kind of extracted about 25 grand from her own mother, and her mother ain't got that.
Yeah, what do you think? So she broke. You've written her a ticket for breaking your unenforceable rules. So what do you think about the analogy to the air traffic controller? That when you have resentments, you have more planes flying in the air than you really need, and so the person who is relatively free of resentment, they have much more mental and physiological and psychological space to operate. And the more resentments you have, it's like you're an air traffic controller with additional planes in the air that you need to direct. What do you think of that analogy?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of how it affects me. You're saying I'm doing better with less planes in the air?
I would say most people would do better with fewer planes in the air. Most people will operate better with diminished level of resentment because your sister is occupying space in your mind, and other people are occupying space in your mind. And if you're able to let go of your need to write them up for infractions of your unenforceable rules, I think that your life would improve.
Yeah, but I think it ain't a 365-day-a-year thing, Luke. It's just my birthday came around. You know what I mean? And you do, and at least I do some of that like assessment, and then I notice who called and who didn't call. Bless her heart, my mom didn't call, but she's only half there these days.
Did you write people up? Did you write people up for not contacting you on your birthday who you think should have contacted you on your birthday? Did you add a little resentment in there because they didn't reach out?
No, I mean, hell, Luke, I don't know. I consider you at least an online friend, but hell, I don't know your birthday. We apparently, I hadn't been listening to you long enough. I'm sure you come in on your birthdays wearing a birthday hat or something. But
no, I don't think I'm not aware of commenting on my birthday. It's not a particularly important day to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm deluded, but it doesn't really figure. But what do you think of this notion of writing out tickets on people who break your unenforceable rules? Does that resonate with you? Do you understand the power of that concept?
I think that's why I asked you, was I being too harsh? With what I've described to you about a former best friend, and with what I've described to you about a sister who I mean, personally to me, she only flipped out one day. I mentioned it to you. It was the day that I was didn't have any electricity and was trying to get my generator from my mom's garage, and she had like spittle in the corner of her mouth, and she had like these wild eyes. And I told you, she called the police, and when the police got there, that she told the policeman she could see his evil aura around his body, and she would rather he not come inside. So I mean, she was full blown crazy, but it's the irrationality of that. Had that been a girlfriend, she would have been an ex-girlfriend at that spot, because now we got the police involved. And 2 weeks after that, I had to do some kind of court date for a temporary restraining order, and that bitch of a sister didn't even show up to admit that she was crazy. You get what I'm saying? You see how you end up stepping in somebody's pile of poo just because you don't cut the cancer out? So that's why it does sound, when you and I talk about stuff like multi-level marketing schemes, that I'm unwilling to traffic with people like that. It's because it's a road to nowhere, I guess. But anyway, Luke.
Wait. No, you can't go yet. Okay. I want to recommend a book for anyone who's listening on this topic and wants to understand it more deeply. One of my top 5 books is called Forgive for Good, A Proven Prescription for Health and Happiness by Fred Luskin. He's a 1960s hippie who went to Stanford, did a PhD in psychology, and this book is a popular version of his PhD thesis. And it's just a great dissection of what it means to release resentment. What do you... Here, I want to give you an analogy. So Europe hates Putin. Europe wants to keep Putin out of the G7, wants to keep Putin isolated because Putin broke one of their unenforceable rules. He invaded Ukraine. And Putin and Europe wants to take zero responsibility for expanding NATO up to Russia's borders, which precipitated the war on Ukraine. So Europe has written up all these unenforceable tickets against Vladimir Putin, which is blocking Europe from having a productive engagement with Putin. And so I think Europe is hurting itself with this habit of writing up tickets for their unenforceable rules against Vladimir Putin, just as we as individuals do not help ourselves when we write people up in our heads and give them tickets for breaking our unenforceable rules. What do you think of what I just said?
Yeah, that's true. Europe, well, from my perspective, Europe is kind of clutching and clinging to they've got no future. You get what I'm saying? They've got no natural resources. They've got no new technology that's going to let them recreate the 17th and 18th century where they were able to capitalize on everybody else's resources. So I see it as just like an outdoor museum, you know, and Putin, Elliot and I was going back and forth one night about Putin's only got $1 trillion GDP. They're only like 8th in the world. I said, hell, 8th. They're probably only 12th or 15th in the wake of this war that's been going on with Ukraine. But Putin has $75 trillion worth of natural resources under the ground. The future is on his team. You get what I'm saying? But Europe is in the exact opposite situation where the future is not good for them.
Right, but you see how Europe is being hurt by their need to write Putin up for breaking Europe's unenforceable rules. Europe is so weak, so pathetic that they have no ability to enforce their rules against Putin, but they want to banish him and deny him on the basis of this faulty construction that they have, where it's really important to them that they write up tickets on Vladimir Putin for breaking their unenforceable rules. Do you see how self-destructive that is?
Oh, yeah, and they've gotten themselves in a situation now where, I mean, if truth be told, Europe should be coming cap in hand to Russia and saying, please, use our companies, use our whatever, and let's start extracting. You know, your country is 28% of the earth. Why don't we work together and start extracting some of those 75 trillion? You'll get your cut, we'll get our cut, everybody's happy. But they've put themselves, you know, in a trench, in an adversarial position to where there's nothing. Somebody's got to go. You get what I'm saying? It's just a matter before they escalate even further. And they definitely don't like the situation where Trump is saying, hell with that, I'm out of this. I mean, I don't know.
We don't benefit from writing up tickets on people with our unenforceable rules. We don't benefit from building resentments against people for breaking our unenforceable rules. It's a maladaptive approach to life.
Yes. Yes, I've taken up too much of your time, Luke.
Okay,
we can
bro.
talk here in a few days. I appreciate you indulging me, bro.
Thanks, bro. Take care, bro. Okay. All right, that was the Kipmeister. Back to Howard Kurtz on Fox News.
We thought the old story about the $6,000 toilet seat in some battleship.
Well, I got to jump in. They may love it until they start to feel the effects of it, as we talked about earlier. And by the way, you mentioned MSNBC. I'm going to go to Molly next, Charlie. Hold on. Nicole Wallace on MSNBC, 3 minutes into Musk's appearance, broke in, started arguing, and they just talked over the segment for the rest of the time. Now,
so you can see why people increasingly prefer podcasts and live streams, because people get to have their say. Right, Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister of Israel, right, has been going on Dan Senor's podcast because on a decent podcast, right, a decent live stream, people get to have their say. They're not forced into these 30-second sound bites.
That was also true. That was true, I should say, at a Trump news conference. So, Molly, Elon Musk may be able to shrink the workforce. Private companies do this all the time, and we accept it. But aren't lawmakers and lobbyists and activists going to go nuclear if he starts cutting programs by 30 to 40%?
If he actually starts doing that.
Well,
I mean, I think that's the real elephant in the room, is that for all the sort of drama and hubbub that it's created to have him sort of rampaging through, moving fast and breaking things in the federal government, it's not clear that he's actually making any big progress on that trillions in debt and deficits that we've been talking about.
Laying off
right?
a lot of people.
He's laying off less than 5% of the federal workforce so far, which is, and the federal workforce overall is a rounding error on that debt and deficits and the big picture of the federal government. So, you know, Republicans have the House and Senate. They've had them before. If they really did see billions or trillions of dollars that they could painlessly cut from the federal government, they should be doing that. I've asked them why they haven't done that so far, and they are sort of saying, well, it's great that Elon's doing it. But I think
Elon gives them cover.
The question is, you know, whether they are actually going to get to the point where they're doing something meaningful versus just making a big spectacle.
Charlie, reporters asked Musk, we played one example of it repeatedly, about conflicts of interest, and he deflected by saying, I don't submit the contracts. Is that going to fly?
It shouldn't, and we should explore that. And by the way, he's actually cutting, if he's exposing government waste and we're wasting it on SpaceX, well, the hammer might come down on SpaceX. People haven't thought about that aspect of this either. But I want to get back to my initial point. Reporters like me and Molly fell down on the job. We didn't see the big story that was out there with all this government spending on stuff that the public hates. This is the biggest story right now because Elon Musk is out there saying, we give money to some of the most bizarre things, and it's your money, the taxpayer, and people are outraged. Now, obviously, if we start cutting stuff in rural Georgia, and people might get mad. But overall, I don't see riots in the street over thousands of dollars going to transgender dance festivals in Bangladesh. I just don't see that. Maybe you guys can tell me.
Well, first of all, I think that Elon Musk, I just want to point this out, gets relentlessly negative coverage because most of the press thinks he ruined Twitter and spews things that aren't true. But Molly, on this point, is it fair to say that we haven't covered, waste, fraud, and abuse? It seems to me it's come up in every campaign in the last 40 years.
And I think we cover the big picture of the debt and the deficit, especially at the Wall Street Journal, on a very consistent and very rigorous basis. But the truth about the debt and the deficit is that you can find, every bit of something that could plausibly be considered waste, fraud, and abuse, and you're not going to make progress on the trillions in federal debt until you actually cut the things that I think people would not be so pleased that will not be cheering in the streets to see being cut, like Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security and defense spending.
Right. Look, I understand why people in the Premier League and other advanced soccer leagues are increasingly playing out of the back to maximize their ball possession. But do you understand what this is doing to me? It's just absolutely nerve-wracking, even if I have minimal emotional investment in the match, to see people playing passes across their own goal when the opposite team is right there, where the smallest mistake is likely to result in a goal for the opposite team, where the goalkeeper has the ball and he dribbles around a defender in front of his own goal. What about my feelings? Right? What about my nerves? I'm a 58-year-old man. I might very well get a stroke or a heart attack, right, from all these Premier League teams playing out of the back. Does anyone care about me? Do they understand what this is doing to me, the viewer? Right? Now, I could build resentment from this. I could look at this, man, this is threatening my life. I could write tickets on these teams, right, for breaking my unenforceable rules. Right, I know that I would be just so tempted to just boot the ball downfield as far as possible. Back to Molly Ball.
And so when and if they get into the point where they are actually starting to make meaningful cuts to the federal budget, it'll be interesting to see what the response is.
Got to go. Those are the big ones. But this is not like laying off software engineers at Tesla.
I was very upfront in my briefing on day one that if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable. And it is a fact that the body of water off the coast of Louisiana is called the Gulf of America. And I'm not sure why news outlets don't.
All right, I think the Trump administration is being ridiculous banning the AP over this, but it's not a matter of free speech. Right? This is no challenge to the First Amendment. if the Trump administration doesn't credential the Associated Press because they disagree with some of the Associated Press's judgment calls.
Broke away early. Molly, 48 questions over 37 minutes. Everything from Putin to TikTok to tariffs to whacking Mitch McConnell. How did journalists cover it all? And there are a lot of things that don't get much attention because of the fire hose effect.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think I think first of all, we're all very happy to have this amount of transparency into what the president is thinking, what he's doing. Not quite sure how he finds the time. It's a big job, but
this is an important part of the job.
You know, we did not see Biden for weeks or months at a time, and he never gave formal press.
You know how he finds the time? You know how he has the energy to do this? Because he is getting it from his connections with other people, right? If you get on the same page with the press, you understand their concerns, right? You use empathy to experience what the other person is experiencing and how they see the world, right? That fills you with a surge of energy, right? I am filled with energy right now from my stimulating conversation with the Kipmeister.
Press conferences and even these types of what we call avails, right? Brief unscheduled availabilities tended to be very brief to non-existent.
The contrast is dramatic.
It is a great contrast, and it's wonderful to have this amount of access to the President of the United States in order to ask the questions, you know, on behalf of our viewers, readers, and listeners. But the fire hose is real, and I think we are all struggling with how to just sort of triage the sheer amount of news because this administration has had such a quick start and such a busy month.
Right.
There's just too much to focus on.
Every week I tell my staff, like, you know, there's a lot of things we're not going to be able to get in. Now, Trump did take a swipe at Caitlin Collins, saying, oh, nobody watches CNN anymore. But then there's all this sort of smaller stuff. Trump moves to end paper straws. I think this one is plastic.
I love coverage of the news media because from 8th grade until about age 20, my primary goal in life was to be a reporter, a journalist, a TV anchorman. I wanted to be in the news, and I worked at K-High Cahill Radio during high school. Then I worked for them for 2.5 years after high school. I was the weekend news anchor. To me, there's no better job in the world than being a reporter for me, because you have a press pass, you have an all-access pass to the world, and I am a tad bit emotionally awkward, a little bit emotionally stunted, a little bit emotionally retarded. But with that press pass, right, it gave me the strength and the courage to go more places in life and to ask more questions and to have some status and prestige. It's just such an exciting position. And I know the journalism industry is dead as an industry overwhelmingly, but damn it, I just love talking about it. It fills me with energy.
Trump stops producing pennies. Trump won't deport Prince Harry, but takes a shot at Meghan Markle. Trump names himself chairman of the Kennedy Center. Any one of these things in a sort of quieter administration would be like a week-long story.
Well, and they're all news, and we have to cover all of them. But I think that we collectively as the media are doing a pretty good job, actually, of keeping focused on the big stuff. Mm-hmm. So yes, you cover the little stuff. Yes, you hash out all the implications. But the big things that are happening are not the things that the president says.
So just imagine you got disillusioned with Donald Trump, and so you stopped putting much importance on politics, and you have missed out, right, or the elation, the joy, the thrill of the past 3 weeks of this new Trump administration and his unbelievable comeback from being criminally prosecuted and convicted, right? Multiple felonies out of New York, overcoming 4 different prosecutions, criminal prosecutions, to come back and win presidency of the United States. I mean, just what an amazing time to be alive. So I absolutely understand why some people withdraw from following the news. I don't think following the news is essential. But how about some moderation, just like a moderate keeping up with events and then opening yourself up to the thrill of where unexpectedly things start to go your way.
For the great American race, the Daytona 500. Mr. Trump set to depart from Palm Beach International, which I've been there. It is a super airport, in and out easy. And, of course, we will follow along and take you live to Daytona Beach, Florida, not terribly long from now. In the meantime, welcome in, everybody. I'm Kevin Cork, and this is Fox News Live for a Sunday afternoon. Meantime, we are also learning new details today about the Trump administration's push to end the war in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. Correspondent Dana Maureen McNichol is live in West Palm Beach with more on that. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Kevin. European leaders, they're putting together an
So remember, the expert consensus from John J. Mearsheimer and the rest of his peers was that there's no way that Donald Trump would just be able to end the war in Ukraine, right? Mearsheimer anticipated this war going on indefinitely. He said that Trump would not be able to change things. Well, it does appear that Trump has put in place, right, a plan that should end the conflict, and Trump wants to regain good relations with Russia so that the United States can pivot to combating China. Trump wants to wean Russia away from its alliance with China by promising to restore normal relations. And that's so much better for America's geostrategic rivalries and conflicts, right? To peel Russia away from China, pivot away from Europe, and focus our resources on the threat that China poses.
Emergency summit in Paris after reports show that they will not have a seat at the table for talks with Russia about ending the war. This morning, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz pushed back.
They may not like some of the sequencing that is going on in these negotiations, but I have to push back on any notion that.
Okay, the Mighty Puck says, look, given the observation that the United States is doing better than every other developed country in certain things, right, in economic growth, but quality of life in most European countries and in Australia, and quality of life in most advanced countries, I think, is frequently, usually much higher than in the United States. So the U.S. is doing better in some things, but we have suffered a steady decline in the quality of life in the United States. And when you go to Europe or when you go to Australia, you are struck by the much higher level of social cohesion, social trust, the much lower level of violent crime. Okay, back to your question. Why the push for more EU-style technocracy everywhere but the U.S.? Well, technocracy and rule by bureaucrats is a holdover from the monarchical system. The United States began as a rebellion against the monarchy. So monarchical countries are much more at ease with bureaucrats having more power than Americans are. And also the educated class believes in rule by experts, and socialism and communism mean rule by experts, right? Communism is more committed to rule by experts than socialists, but both of these systems of politics, socialism and communism, are about rule by experts. So Europeans have had rule by experts at a much more dramatic level than Americans. Americans tend to be more unruly. Our politics is not nearly as smooth as Europe. Bureaucrats, by and large, don't have as much power in the United States, and so experts like rule by experts. And Europe is much more ruled by experts than the United States. But there is a populist, expertise skeptical wave rolling through Europe in a whole new direction. So the expert class loves rule by experts, regular people not so much. And this is what J.D. Vance was talking about, that Europe should stop trying to reduce people's political choices. Like in Romania, they canceled an election because the populist candidate was set to win, and they postponed it until May on the basis that Russia gave a few $100,000 to the populist party. So since the Second World War, the expert class has tried to narrow the realm of what should be up for political discussion. The lesson that the expert class took away from the World War II is how dangerous racial and national identity is. And so we need to make less and less of life subject to the rule of the political. So in reaction to the bloodiness of the 30 Years' War in Germany in the 17th century, the war between the Protestants and the Catholics, right, there was a movement to try to remove religion from the political. And then after World War II, there was a movement to try to remove racial and immigration considerations away from the political and have more and more rule by experts and by EU-style cooperations so that populist parties and popular will be blunted and essentially made to be subservient to rule by experts and technocrats.
They aren't being consulted. They absolutely are.
Walz said it will ultimately be President Trump that will end the war. He said a couple of key factors will help drive the negotiations. One, this has to be a permanent end to the war, not temporary, adding it cannot be ended on the battlefield. Two, NATO has to step up their contributions. And three, American people deserve some type of payback for the billions they've invested in this war. Now, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said this morning that he is confident Ukraine will have a seat at the table.
I not only count on it, I'm sure that we have to be.
Okay, so John Mearsheimer, right, proclaimed that Trump wouldn't be able to end this war. And then he did a complete 360 after Pete Hegseth's address in Europe a few days ago and after J.D. Vance's talk. And he's completely changed his perspective. And it's fascinating how John Mearsheimer never uses moral arguments in the Ukraine war, but he invokes them all the time in Israel's Gaza conflict. So this is John Mearsheimer on Spectator TV, a video released February 12, and here he says Trump's not going to be able to solve Ukraine.
He said that he was going to come in and solve the Ukraine problem in one day, and that maybe even solve it before he moved into the White House. We can talk about this again, but if anything, it looks to me like we're in more trouble on Ukraine than we were before he became the president. So I'm not too sure how this all works out in the end. He may have the Gaza conflict once and for all, and also trying to shut down the Ukraine conflict once and for all. Those should be the highest priority issues. Into the Ukraine case in great detail at this point in time, but if you look at Ukraine, he said a number of things to the Russians that are quite offensive and are not going to engender trust in him among Russian elites, especially Putin. And I think moving forward, if anything, he wants to do everything he can to create a situation where Trump is trusted by Putin. But if you look at what he says and how he says it, I don't think he's, helping his cause. Trump is helping his cause. So words do matter, even for realists. And I think in that regard, he's not been terribly smart.
Do you think that there's a Ukraine lobby in Washington and what they might be thinking about Trump's latest moves? Scott Bessent is, I think, in Kiev at the moment, talking.
So John Mearsheimer completely changed his tune after Pete Hegseth's address. So this is a video released one day later. So Spectator TV, presuming that Mearsheimer recorded it same day as release, was February 12. Right, this is Mearsheimer, all right, just one day later, but after the Pete Hegseth address.
Vis-a-vis Ukraine, I'll summarize it. You can accept or modify or reject my summary that Ukraine will not be in NATO and it will not return to its pre-2014 borders.
Those are two of the key arguments that Hegseth laid out yesterday in Brussels. And it's very important to understand that those two arguments, or those 2 points that Hegseth made, dovetail with what were the two principles, or what are the two principal demands of the Russians for getting a peace agreement in Ukraine. In other words, the Russians have said Ukraine cannot be in NATO, number one, and number two, the West has to recognize that we have annexed Crimea and those 4 oblasts in the easternmost part of Ukraine. And what Hegseth said and what Trump said yesterday is that Ukraine is not going to be in NATO, number one. And number two, that the pre-2014 Ukrainian borders are never going to be seen again as the real borders of Ukraine, and Ukraine is going to have to accept the fact that it's going to lose a sizable chunk of territory. Now, how much territory the Americans are willing to allow the Russians to take was not spelled out, but by implication, it sounded like Hegseth was saying that the Russians can keep those 4 oblasts plus Crimea. So what's happened here is, in effect, the Trump administration has said they are accepting the 2 key parameters that the Russians have put forth, which up to now, hardly anybody in the West has considered acceptable.
Here is a comment about that.
So Mearsheimer just completely changed his perspective, and I wonder if his confident, striking method of address, right, what makes him such a great public speaker, perhaps diminished his clarity on this topic.
By someone with whom you disagree profoundly, and with whom I disagree profoundly, even though I worked with him for 2 years at Fox, a former national security advisor and former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, cut number 2.
Putin has scored a whole series of victories today. It's hard to encompass them all, but I think one, in addition to these substantive concessions, is that he has now, it seems, exactly what he wants. Putin doesn't want to negotiate with Zelensky. He wants to negotiate with Trump because he thinks he'll get more out of him, and he's absolutely right.
Is John right?
Yep, he's exactly right. I mean, we want to understand that what Trump and Hegseth did yesterday was to radically alter American foreign policy toward Russia and toward Ukraine. And they are cutting against the conventional wisdom. So you would expect John Bolton and the vast majority of security experts in the United States and in Western Europe, or Eastern Europe as well, to be beside themselves, to be enraged by what Trump and Hegseth have done. And of course, the Ukrainians themselves are not going to be happy about this, to put it mildly.
Well, the Ukrainians can't be happy about a lot of things, not the least of which is this idea. Tell me what you think about this, that President Putin and President Trump will meet in Saudi Arabia without President Zelensky.
Hardly surprising.
Right. It's not a surprise, but they're going to come out, presumably.
So the strong take what they want and the weak endure what they must.
With some sort of a deal. And for him, it'll be a take it or leave it. No?
I think that that's basically right. And you want to think about the Europeans in this context as well. There are really 3 players on our side: the Americans, and here we're talking about the Trump administration, the Europeans, both West and East Europeans, and then the Ukrainians. And the question you want to ask yourself is, are we really going to pay serious attention to what Ukraine wants and what Europe wants? Or are we just going to negotiate a deal for ourselves? Listen, let me make a very important point about the comments that were made yesterday, especially by Hegseth, which reflects on this. And I don't think most people are focusing on at this point in time. There are 2 dimensions to his comments yesterday. One has to do with what we're talking about, which is the deal to settle the war in Ukraine. But Hegseth also makes it very clear that the United States is moving away from Europe, and we are shifting the burden for security in Europe to the Europeans, and that the Americans are going to pivot to Asia in a serious way. If you read Hegseth's comments yesterday, and of course Trump has been talking like this for a long time, there is a divorce coming down.
All right, there was a key word there, read. All right, you can read a speech 5-10 times more quickly than it takes you to listen to a speech.
On the road that is of great importance. That tells me that if the Europeans don't like the deal that Trump works out, Trump is not going to be very bothered. And he's not going to be very bothered if the Ukrainians don't like the deal.
Correct.
Right.
Here is Trump talking about meeting with Putin in Saudi Arabia. Chris, cut number 4.
I'll be dealing with President Putin largely on the phone, and we ultimately expect to meet. In fact, we expect that he'll come here, and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia. The first time we'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done. But we want to end that war. That war is a disaster. It's a really bloody, horrible war.
Well, why is he keeping the pipeline open? Why are we still sending military equipment to Kyiv? The horrible war that he has condemned, the condemnation in which you and I joined, could be stopped in a very short period of time if that pipeline were turned off. Don't you agree?
Well, I think the point is that you have to give the administration some time to put all the pieces of the puzzle in, that it is morally bankrupt. And
shoot, I just I clicked and made a mistake. But anyway, here's the point. What I introduce. John Mearsheimer continually invokes morality with regard to only one geopolitical issue, Israel. Right? He doesn't invoke it with Ukraine, with Taiwan, but he continually comes back to the moral perspective on Israel. And here's evidence from this February 13 discussion. Right? He's about to denounce America's support of Israel and its war in Gaza as morally bankrupt. He doesn't do this with regard to any other issue. So morality, some people might see it. I've got an open mind. This might be true, right? He consistently invokes morality against Israel. And he doesn't seem to invoke morality anywhere else. And that's curious to me. Why is it only Israel that he wields morality as a weapon?
Unworkable. So I think there's hardly any doubt that this is not going to work.
You have a gifted understanding
inside Israel, and of course inside the United States, who understand that it is morally bankrupt and
morally bankrupt. Right? He doesn't use that kind of analysis anywhere else, only with regard to Israel. And here he gets on his moral high horse again.
Where the Israelis themselves hardly ever talked about ethnic cleansing because, again, it's a morally reprehensible strategy.
Why is Israel the only target of John Mearsheimer's moral indignation? Asking for a friend. Why doesn't he ever invoke morality anywhere else in the world?
Israelis are free to settle the West Bank, notwithstanding the moral, notwithstanding.
Right, so the judge and John Mearsheimer continually invoking the moral argument only with regard to Israel. So when people invoke morality to hurt you, right, maybe it's not worth trying to argue morality, right? Maybe what's most important is keeping clarity on the well-being of your group and your tribe and recognizing when people are invoking morality to hurt you.
Well, why is he keeping the pipeline open? Why are we still sending military equipment to Kyiv? The horrible war that he has condemned, the condemnation in which you and I joined, could be stopped in a very short period of time if that pipeline were turned off. Don't you agree?
Well, I think the point is that you have to give the administration some time to put all the pieces of the puzzle together and to get this working. I mean, he's only been president for 3 weeks, and
So the judge was there invoking morality with regard to the war in Ukraine. I just don't recall John Mearsheimer invoking morality with regard to any rivalry except Israel and its battle for survival.
Thinking through how they're going to deal with this. You know, this is actually a very tricky issue. If we were to cut the flow of aid to Ukraine right away.
So I've sent John Mearsheimer another interview request. We'll see if he ever grants me one.
It's likely that very shortly thereafter, the Ukrainian military would collapse. The Russians would end up conquering a lot more territory. And then the question becomes, what does the deal look like between Russia on one side and the United States on the other side regarding how much territory the Russians get to keep?
It makes sense for Russia to keep and to run those parts of Ukraine that are primarily Russian speaking. And then those parts of Ukraine that are not primarily Russian speaking, right, should not fall under Russia's aim. Right, this was a video released February 15, and it's the Duran, and here's John Mearsheimer with Glenn Deason here on the upper right, Alexander Makuris on the upper left.
I feel we meet every 4 weeks, but the world looks like a very different place every time we speak. So I guess we should get used to this. But yeah, how are the two of you reading the situation?
I'll defer to Alexander, but before I do it, all I want to say is that on Tuesday morning, the 12th, I had one view of the Ukraine conflict, and by the afternoon, I had a completely different view.
Right. That was awesome. Right. That was so honest. Right. Mearsheimer noting that on the morning of February 12th, he had one view of the Ukraine conflict, and by the afternoon of February 12th, he had a completely different perspective. Right. Completely reversed his analysis.
because the Hegseth speech had taken place. In the meantime, President Trump had announced that he had talked to Putin. So almost, instantaneously, I did a 180-degree turn. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Alexander.
Yeah, because this is something I wanted to bring up later, because you've been very thinking that.
And the President of the United States in direct dialogue with each other. We have talked about negotiating teams being organized. Trump has mentioned who he wants to be a part of those negotiating teams. The Russians have talked about further their own negotiating teams. There's talk about a summit meeting in Saudi Arabia, but we are still very much at the start of the process. And in the meantime, the war in Ukraine continues and will probably continue for some time yet. And what I will say is this, listening not so much to, not reading so much what Trump has said to Putin or following too closely what Trump's been saying, which is not always consistent, perhaps even more interesting and important and alarming for people in Europe is what Pete Hegseth has been saying, because he's been talking about the realities, and realities which are indeed realities, but which people in Europe and to some extent Ukraine don't want to face, and realities that Ukraine is not going to join NATO, and realities that Ukraine is not going to recover its lost territories, and further realities that the United States is not going to deploy troops in Ukraine, and giving every indication that this project, if you like, the proxy war in Ukraine, has from an American point of view gone as far as it can, and it really can't be taken further, and that it should be wound down. But we have those statements, and they are important statements, and we have a process of discussion underway, but we've still got a long and tangled route before an actual agreement is reached, and it might never be. Just saying.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Alexander said, I think the Hegseth speech in Brussels was really the key. I mean, obviously, President Trump is President Trump, and he's the man in charge. But they sent Hegseth out to deliver a very clear message. His words were carefully crafted. And I think his speech was truly remarkable in terms of what he said. Just to start, it's clear that the Russians have had two central demands since at least June 14th of this year. One is that Ukraine will be a genuinely neutral country. It won't be in NATO, either de jure or de facto. And number two, that the West and Ukraine will recognize the annexation of those four oblasts in the east of Ukraine, plus Crimea. And Hegseth said quite clearly that Ukraine is not going to be in NATO. And he said that Ukraine is not going to get back all of its territory. Now, he didn't stipulate exactly how much territory the United States would be willing to concede to the Russians, but I think it was implicit that those four oblasts plus Crimea are gone. So in a very important way, Hegseth, who was speaking for the administration, was saying that we accept the two principal demands that the Russians make. And that is a major turnaround. I certainly didn't expect it. And it opens the possibility that you'll get an agreement here. But to take this a step further, and Alexander, of course, was getting at this, there's another big dimension to this aside from Ukraine per se, and that is the Americans' relationship or the United States' relationship with Europe. And basically, Hegseth said, if a security guarantee is given to Ukraine, it does not include the United States of America. The Europeans give that security guarantee. This is a quite remarkable statement. Because we all know, and Zelensky said this, that a security guarantee from the Europeans without the United States and without NATO is meaningless, right? The Europeans can't provide for the security of Ukraine. So in a very important way, you see that the United States is beginning to separate itself from Europe. And Hegseth, today, I believe, or yesterday in Warsaw said that you want to understand that United States troops in Europe is not forever, or are not forever. This is another quite remarkable statement. No previous policymaker, certainly in the Biden administration, would have said anything like that. So the glacial plates are moving here in a very important way. And just to add to this, you want to remember that President Trump has been in office for only about 3 weeks. He has 4 more years in front of him, right? And in terms of the U.S.-European relationship, he can fundamentally change that over the course of the next 4 years. But anyway, my second set of points have to do with whether or not we can actually realize a peace agreement. And Alexander concluded by saying that this is not clear, that this is a really dicey issue. And I agree with him. And let me tell you what I think are the two main problems. One is, at some point, Trump is going to have to bring the Europeans and the Ukrainians into the deal. It just can't be a U.S.-Russia deal. And I think the Ukrainians and the Europeans are going to be roadblocks. If you listen to Keir Starmer, he said today, to my utter amazement, that it's inevitable that Ukraine is going to be brought into NATO. This directly contradicts what the Trump administration is saying. It's a really sort of in-your-face statement. And that makes you wonder how the Europeans and the Americans and the Ukrainians are going to craft some sort of deal with the Russians that's acceptable to all four of those parties. The other problem is it's going to take time to make this work. And in the meantime, the Russians are winning on the battlefield. And it is possible that all of this discourse over the past few days will sow further doubts in the minds of soldiers in the Ukrainian military, make them less willing to fight, and facilitate the breakdown of the Ukrainian army, in which case the Russians will conquer more territory. And you want to think about what the implications are of the Russians conquering more territory. It's one thing to talk about signing a deal where the 4 oblasts plus Crimea are lost. It's another thing to talk about a situation where the Russians control 8 or 9 or 7, however many oblasts, a really big slice of the country, and getting the Russians to abandon those additional oblasts that they've conquered so that you can make the deal palatable to the Ukrainians and to the Europeans. It's going to be wickedly difficult. So I think that given the difficulty of putting an agreement together and the danger that the Russians will end up capturing a lot more territory, makes it even harder to see how this is all going to work out.
Regarding the security guarantees, though, because Hegseth did say...
Very important to understand that Hegseth said, he said explicitly that America's position is a recognition of hard power realities on the ground. Just think about those words. He said this in Brussels. It's a recognition of hard power realities on the ground. In other words, Hegseth understands, the Trump administration understands, we have lost. We have lost this war. The tide has turned against Ukraine and the West. The problem is that huge numbers of people in the West don't understand that. They operate under this illusion that Ukraine is doing fine, and all we have to do is give them a bit more weaponry and fine-tune the fighting machine, and they'll stymie the Russians and eventually roll them back. And if you think like that about the situation on the ground, then obviously you're not going to like this deal at all. But if you face reality, which is what Hegseth and Trump and company are doing, then it's obvious you have no choice here but to end the war on favorable terms if you can. So again, I think the Hegseth speech, when you look at it, is a really quite remarkable document. The number of things that he says in very clear terms that are quite profound. You agree with them. I happen to agree with them. But the things that he says that are quite profound, quite explicit, are really amazing. And I think the Trump administration will build on what Hegseth said. I think that's the foundation. I think they sent him out on purpose to make that set of arguments. Second point, just about multipolarity. I think what's going on here is that the United States wants to pivot to Asia, and it understands that if you pivot to someplace, you have to pivot from someplace. And they want to pivot from Europe and go to Asia. I think that they'd like to pivot from the Middle East as well and put an end to that. But it's much more difficult because of the Israel lobby in the United States to pivot in any meaningful way from the Middle East. But Europe, you can pivot from. And I think what's happening here is that the Trump administration wants to have good relations with the Russians and, in effect, peel the Russians away from the Chinese. I think that the Trump administration is trying to do what the Nixon administration did when it changed our relationship with China because we didn't like the idea of China and the Soviet Union being the best of friends and us being on the other side of the fence. We brought the Chinese to our side of the fence. I think in this case, what Trump and company are trying to do is bring the Russians over to our side of the fence and put some daylight. Doesn't mean that the Russians and the Americans are going to be bosom buddies or allies or anything like that. But I think that the Trump administration wants to put some daylight between China and Russia, wants to get us out of Europe as much as possible and let us concentrate on East Asia.
It's a bit strange, the reactions, because it seems very Russian.
We, meaning the West, is that we don't pay attention to what I would call brute facts. We fail to recognize brute facts. And we fail to think rationally and logically about all sorts of issues. And what's happened is we've created this sort of ideological straitjacket that if you don't fit into it, you're pushed completely out of the discourse, the mainstream discourse. It's really kind of bizarre. And J.D. Vance was making this point in Munich when he said that, you know, it's a lot like the Soviet Union used to be here in Europe, right? There's this ideological straitjacket. So that people like us who have been arguing against the conventional wisdom for a long, long time, and I do believe we emphasize brute facts and logic. This is not to say we're always right. We've all been wrong on a number of issues. That just goes with the territory. But we're concentrating on the brute facts and we're trying to be as logical as possible. But because we come to conclusions that are outside the ideological straitjacket, you're basically ruled out of court. You're not part of the discourse. So we have this huge number of people in the West who are thinking about Ukraine based on faulty logic and a misunderstanding of the facts. And in those sorts of circumstances, it's no surprise that you're in this disastrous situation. If people had paid serious attention to the facts and had thought logically, we would have shut this war down a good year and a half ago. And it would have been to Ukraine's advantage. And this argument that Ukraine is not losing on the battlefield, it can turn the tide, has nothing to do with facts and logic. And pursuing policies based on that set facts is destined to do even more damage to Ukraine. So I just think it's very important, especially when you're dealing with national security issues, for people to be brutally honest about what's going on, whether they like it or not. You just, you know, if you want to be a good strategist, you want to think about what's best for your country. Sort of basic intellectual integrity is essential. And I think intellectual integrity has suffered enormous damage since the Cold War ended in 1989. And that's in good part why we're in so much trouble today.
Continuous pivot closer and closer to Russia. Again, it's the limits of how much territory you can take, but in terms of moving the military infrastructure, I think this refusal to accept any new status quo is really something that made the Russians simply draw a red line. And obviously, as everyone recognized, Ukraine was really it, which is why, you know, Robert Gates, William Burns, everyone recognized 2008 was a horrible mistake, a huge overreach. Anyways, as we always tend to go a bit over time, Alexander, John, do any of you have any final thoughts?
I agree. I agree with the last point, and I think this has been said by John as well. 2008, that decision is going to be researched and discussed and argued about for years. It was the fatal moment which set Europe on the course to war. A fact that is not acknowledged in Europe, of course, in Europe at all, but which we need to acknowledge. We need to understand the momentousness and the recklessness of that decision, which wasn't even properly thought through or discussed at the time. It was certainly not the big media story, as I remember.
Yeah, and just one final point, Glenn. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this, but you want to remember that NATO expansion was packaged together with two other strategies. One was EU expansion, and the other were the color revolutions. And the color revolutions are usually thought of in terms of the Orange Revolution in Ukraine and the Rose Revolution in Georgia. But we were interested in fomenting a color revolution inside of Russia. When Michael McFaul was the US ambassador to Moscow, he was in a very important way pushing for a color revolution inside of Russia. And as you can understand, this really spooked the Russians. So it was not just NATO expansion, it was also EU expansion and the possibility of a color revolution inside of Moscow that really contributed to this disastrous policy outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, just as a final comment, when after the coup in 2014, there's a New York Times article which came out in 2024, I think, which argued that, the first day after the coup in 2004, you had the CIA, MI6, and the new security agency, well, the new security chief of the intelligence agency in Ukraine, who obviously been handpicked or approved by Washington, they agreed to this trilateral agreement between the three security institutions. And one of the things was the Americans were cheering on the CIA, saying, well, how wonderful it is now to have the Ukrainians, so we can really infiltrate the Russians here, because when the Ukrainians meet the Russians, it's like their brothers. They don't even think that they're handing over information. So, and even the former head of the National Endowment for Democracy even suggested, after Ukraine, now Putin should be worried. We can come for them. John McCain, he even made this threat as well. He tweeted something after Arab Spring, Moscow next, or, something along those lines. It's just, it couldn't be more obvious that after Ukraine, obviously we were coming for Russia as well. So it's, Anyways, this belongs to a different show. So, Alexander, John, like always, thank you.
Okay, fascinating discussion there with John Mearsheimer and the Duran crew. All right, here are some news articles that grabbed my attention this morning. Washington Post: Trump's global funding freeze leaves anti-terror programs in limbo. Asking for a friend, how effective are anti-terror programs? I know that in American schools, anti-bullying programs are really just fronts for gay propaganda. So can't be as skeptical that anti-terror programs are particularly effective at reducing terror. I believe that people, by and large, act in pursuit of their own interests, and if the United States does things that make it the focus of jihadi anger, right, you're going to have more jihadi attacks against the United States. I fear that Donald Trump's plans for Gaza will focus jihadi rage at the United States, and Americans will die as a result of these jihadi attacks. Politico: Trump's anti-DEI edicts just scared a big sponsor away from a major pride event. Just think about what a loss to our culture this is. All right, we've now got a major sponsor being scared away from promoting gay promiscuity. Right? So here's Politico: Bose Allen's decision to cancel a sponsorship ought to worry anyone who cares about Washington culture, and I would say anyone who cares about the future of gay promiscuity, who cares about the promotion of the gay lifestyle. This is really bad news. Why can't we have major American corporations now promoting and celebrating gay promiscuity? Like, what kind of prudish country have we become? Now, are we going to say that orgies are a bad thing, or that visceral ways of expressing your love for another member of the same sex who you don't know, that somehow this is going to become less honored, less celebrated in America? Booz Allen Hamilton, it's a mammoth beltway federal contractor, long been a supporter of gay causes, right? They're dedicated to the advancement of the gay life, right? This is on their firm's website. And now Washington, D.C. has won the right to host one of the world's biggest gay festivals. I mean, what an amazing accomplishment. I mean, just the thrills that must run up and down the spines of people in Washington, D.C., knowing that it gets to host one of the world's biggest gay festivals. Just the tingles that go up and down the leg. And of course, you'd expect Booz Allen to sign on to underwrite the event known as World Pride 2025. Look, we're all going to be at World Pride 2025. Like, be there or be square. And now this disheartening news: World Pride is now projected to draw 3 million visitors in just a few months, but Booz Allen abruptly withdrew as a sponsor. Right? They're worried that merely supporting a global gay festival will put it on the wrong side of its dominant customer, President Donald Trump's federal government. What a sad day in America, where you can no longer sponsor Globo Homo without fearing retribution. Like, where are we going as our country? Like, our most sacred rights written into the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution to participate in mass orgies with strangers, our most sacred rights are now under threat. I mean, the Trump administration puts out an executive order forbidding diversity, equity, and inclusion by companies in federal contracting. And now it's targeting our most sacred values. My God, what kind of country are we turning into? Like, are we no longer going to have festivals promoting promiscuity among strangers in front of children? Like, our poor kids, they're no longer going to be exposed to these healthy role models. This is incredibly disheartening. Like, where are our children going to get to see like these kind of healthy role models, these healthy, sacred ways of expressing identity? I mean, there's just so much chaos and uncertainty from this new Trump administration, right? His edicts are ostensibly about certain HR practices, but they increasingly feel like campaigns against disfavored identity groups, right? Are you trying to tell me that America is no longer sacralizing orgies? Is this where we are as a country? Is this who we are as Americans now? We're not going to celebrate the transmission of monkeypox and other STDs? That we're not going to go, yay! This is, I'm just ripped up inside. I mean, businesses are just removing diversity goals from their priorities. They're excising the acronym DEI from all company communications. Right? Links to Booz Allen's entries from previous year's Pride festivities no longer go to a page celebrating the firm's LGBTQ employees. They're now redirected to some kind of generic page about Booz Allen's warm culture. Look, a warm culture is not a piss orgy. Like, warm culture, that's all well and good, but our most sacred values are about celebrating piss orgies. Who are we as Americans now that we no longer celebrate piss orgies? Like, what kind of country have we turned into where federal contractors are no longer celebrating and promoting piss orgies? Where we're no longer promoting promiscuous sex with strangers in front of children? Yes, I am so mad. I am so mad. They don't do this to me. Right? This is my country too. Celebrating gay promiscuity has always been the highest value for the United States of America. Right? Our people fought and died at the Battle of Lexington, in the War of Independence against the British, in the 1812 War, in the war against Mexico, the war in the Philippines and against Spain. We died in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, to sacralize piss orgies, and now people are afraid. People think, oh, I might lose contracts. Dude, why are we considering money when it comes to the sacred value of having sex with strangers? I don't recognize this country. Do you know that the first thing that Adolf Hitler did when he took power in Germany is that he put out an executive order saying that any company that celebrates piss orgies will no longer be eligible for contracts with the German state government. We are on the road to Auschwitz. Once you start saying anything negative about transmitting monkeypox, right? Once you stop subsidizing, right, PrEP, so that where you can engage, with full joy, full fervor in a completely promiscuous life, having sex with randos in public toilets and not have to fear getting the HIV. This is the first step to Auschwitz, right? The last time that we had this much celebration and pride about LGBTQ expression was during the Weimar Republic. And that then led to this awful repression and mass genocide, right? There is a thin yellow line between refusing to honor and make sacred and support and endorse piss orgies and committing mass genocide. Just a thin yellow stream, right? We have now, the United States of America, we have crossed the thin yellow stream from democracy and human rights to a Hitlerian, totalitarian, genocidal dictatorship. Right? There's just a thin yellow stream between us and civilization. There's just a thin yellow stream between our higher nature and our lower nature. And we have crossed the thin yellow stream. Right? Any minute now, they're going to be setting up death camps. Right? You cross that yellow stream, and there are no longer human rights. There's no longer peace and harmony in the world. Right? We descend into a state of nature where life is short, nasty, brutish. Can you believe, did you ever think that we would see the day where corporate America would stop celebrating piss orgies? It's just so disheartening. Like, I feel like the orgy community right now is getting hit from all sides. Right? That the protections that they have relied on for decades are now being ripped away, and business is cowering. Business is cowering and running away from the thin yellow stream that protects all of our rights. I mean, the thin yellow stream is the essential fabric in our society. Right? The thin yellow stream draws spectators from across our population. Right? Unless you are out to get gay people, right? It's hard to see how just sponsoring a gay pride event is somehow equivalent to embracing some now forbidden HR practice. I mean, is Chinese New Year next? Is Chinese New Year next? Are we next going to say that doctors may not prescribe puberty blockers to kids? Are we now going to say that our children are going to be denied gender-affirming care? Right? This thin yellow line protects our children to mutilate themselves, to destroy themselves with medication and puberty blockers. Do you understand what a substantial moneymaker, right, gender-affirming care is? Once you can get kids into that gender-affirming care pipeline, right, you're just going to be able to milk hundreds and thousands of dollars from them. Right? They will need a lifetime of medical care. Do you know what a great earner it is? And the only thing that protects this great earner for our most prestigious medical institutions is the thin yellow line. And now that thin yellow line, it's been crossed. Right? That thin yellow line, some people call it the Rubicon. But I'm a plain-spoken bloke. All right, I don't use these, big university words like Rubicon. I just know that we've been taking down plaques celebrating trailblazing women, trailblazing people of color, and people are afraid now to celebrate piss orgies. I mean, you got companies with billions of dollars at stake, and to them, protecting billions of dollars, right, that's more important than celebrating a good old-fashioned piss orgy, right? How did American patriots of the Valley of Forge stay warm during that brutal, brutal winter where it looked like America was absolutely lost, looked like there was no way the United States would form, it looked like George Washington's army was just going to disappear? But piss orgies kept Americans warm, kept Americans safe, kept Americans fired up, right? George Washington said, "Thou shalt stream. Let the piss orgies begin." And that's what kept Americans strong during that nasty, nasty winter during the Valley of Forge. And then the Battle of the Bastogne, right, in World War II, where the Germans had counterattacked and our American forces were surrounded. The weather was brutal. We couldn't supply them. Do you know how our brave men stood in the Battle of Bastogne and fought back against the Nazis? Right, they kept themselves warm with piss orgies. And now we're just pissing it all away. Now we're just turning our backs on our brothers who enjoy a good piss orgy with strangers. And all based on the whims of the Orange Hitler. Right? For decades, I've just thought of a piss orgy as bland, safe, official, celebrated. I never realized that the thin yellow line would come under this kind of attack. And it's not just in America. right? Egal Canada, right? One of Canada's largest LGBTQ events, right? They will not be attending this Pride event in Washington, D.C. for good reasons. They're concerned about the safety of trans members. What if there are kids there who need to get gender-affirming care and it now is denied them, right? How are our doctors going to make a living if they can't get people onto that eternal pipeline of gender-affirming care? I mean, people are so scared, right? They're not even going to bloody orgies anymore. Like, people are too scared right now in large swaths of this country to have sex in public restrooms with randos, right? The whole cottaging industry, it's not in a recession, right? It's in a depression. I mean, George Michael, if he were alive today, like even a strong, proud man like George Michael, he would probably be intimidated from cottaging. Like, World Pride is an apolitical cultural gathering. It is a celebration of the best of us, right? It's an inspiration for the rest of us, right? It's just a gay version of Mardi Gras. You couldn't think of something more harmless. But now we're making all these good people feel unsafe, right? This is just another disturbing vibe shift thanks to the Donald Trump era. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm too upset right now. I can hardly go on. Right? This has completely changed my relationship to my country. I don't feel safe right now. And you can mock me all you want, but in a country where we no longer celebrate piss orgies, right, the next thing you know, there are going to be pogroms against Jews.
Well, there's lots that Steve Kotkin's just said that I agree with, but it's worth asking whether Ferguson's law is going to kick in. It only just happened last year that for the first time the US was spending more on interest payments than on defence. So I think it's possible that all of that is true, but we're now in a relatively late inning of the game. I could, if we'd had this conversation 100 years ago, I could have said to you, there's never been a power like the British Empire. And it's been in this dominant state since the 1780s. And it withstood the loss of its American colonies, and it came back, and it's the dominant economic force in the world. It has the dominant military in the world. It has an innovation ecosystem like no other. And all of that would have been true then, but it was kind of near the end of the game, it turned out. I mean, one important point about this fiscal constraint that I'm talking about, and this is where we can bring Professor Cochrane in, is that in the history of the United States, there have been very few periods when the debt burden, the federal debt, has been so large. We haven't seen the debt burden above 100% of GDP since a period immediately after World War II. And there's never been a time that the United States was spending more servicing that debt than it was spending on its national security. And the other point I would make, which is exactly right, when Steve says it's all relative, if you face an adversary like China that is economically comparable, that can match you in most of the tech.
So Columbia University statistics professor Andrew Goldman made a great point that approximately 2008, Neil Ferguson used to be a respectable professor, like crossed the John Yoo line, right? Once you start publishing on topics you don't know much about and saying absurd things for the sake of attention and applause and money and influence, right, there comes a point where you publish such absurd things that nobody serious can take you seriously anymore. And right, John Yoo crossed that line circa 2006, and Neil Ferguson crossed that line 2008. He just traffics in the most ridiculous analysis, and he is a wealthy man, right? He could hire a grad student to fact check his claims, notes Andrew Goldman. But the reason he does not do that is because that would limit his revolutionary, mind-blowing theories, right? The reason that his theories, right, are so revolutionary and exciting to hear is because he does not feel constrained by facts. He's not particularly interested in facts, right? He left the realm of scholarship to become an entrepreneur, right? 17 years ago, right? One of his major talking points of late is how the United States is so much like the late Soviet Union, right? Just a ridiculous point. It's like Dennis Prager saying, oh, we're in another civil war, we're on the path to Auschwitz, we're on the path to becoming a communist state, a fascist state, and I'm so smart because I can see all these things that you can't see.
And therefore vulnerable to the kind of collision that could bring this whole happy story to a painful end. Mm-hmm. Shawn?
Well, I'll take the middle of the road position, seeing as I'm on the middle between my two historian friends. Power is a strange thing, and greatness. We want prosperity, I think, and power is a means to that end. And I think Steve is right. Our own problems are substantial, but if you're thinking about military or confrontations, the state of your enemies matters. China's economy is not doing great. Russia's economy is in terrible shape. This is not U.S. versus 1930s Germany, where we actually did face a larger military threat. The tendency for governments that spend more on their debt service than their military is to wind up in trouble. I've challenged Neil a little bit on, is this a law? Is it always and everywhere? Is it sometimes? Is it a correlation? Is it a dictum? I think I'll call it a syndrome because it doesn't always happen. And not all countries that get into trouble face Ferguson's law. But I'm not as worried as Neil is from his historical examples. We are spending something like 2 to 3% on debt service of GDP in real terms. We're spending something like 3% of GDP on military, and the question is we're crossing those.
So people have been talking about how our great federal debt is going to destroy us, right, since the 1960s, 1970s, certainly since the 1980s, and yet here we are, stronger than ever. Perhaps some of these warnings are overstated. Lindy Lee, former Democratic fundraiser and strategist, gave a compelling, heartbreaking interview to Shawn Ryan. Let's play from this.
Is a media bias problem, and if not, how do you explain the censorship and suppression of conservative viewpoints on major platforms?
I totally agree. Well, there's one element of that question that I'm going to have to politely disagree with. I don't think I've never been an outright progressive. I'm progressive on the environment, but that's pretty much it. I want clean air and clean water, and I want to remind everybody that this is a fundamentally Republican issue, originated with Richard M. Nixon. He started the EPA. All right, putting that aside, there is tremendous bias against conservatives across mainstream media, but I think the 2024 election was kind of, it's the moment when the crack just, the crack deepened and people realized that the facade was falling. The Democratic Party no longer, despite the entire array of the mainstream media, they still weren't able to perpetrate the lie that Biden wasn't in cognitive decline, that Kamala Harris wasn't a weak candidate. So finally, the scales are falling off of people's eyes, and they're realizing the mainstream media is in cahoots with the Democratic Party, and they're sick and tired of that. So I'm really glad that people like superstars like you, like Joe Rogan, and like so many, actually, you and Joe, just the two of you, and others in the podcast landscape, you guys are, putting the lie to the mainstream narrative. For example, the Hunter Biden laptop story. I'm here to be painfully honest, okay? I don't think the 2020 election was stolen, but I think it was rigged.
Mm-hmm. How do you think it was rigged?
Because the Hunter Biden laptop story was real as fuck. It was real. It wasn't Russian disinformation. The intelligence community lied, which is, I actually know Tulsi, I'll tell you why later, but she is right to question the conclusions of the intelligence community, because these are the same people who told us that the Hunter Biden laptop story was fake. And they're still, the vast majority of Democrats are still going to tell you that it's fake. It's not fake. Mm-hmm. Even the Washington Post did a deep analysis of the contents of the laptop, and the Washington Post substantiated the validity of the laptop. Okay. And so the big guy, that's true. The 10% to the big guy, that's true. They checked out the metadata. It's not Russian disinformation. And you have people like Anthony Blinken lying on behalf of his boss. That is not okay. So it may not have been stolen, but it was rigged, because that story should have gone out. The New York Post shouldn't have been censored. People on social media, people on Facebook and Twitter at that time. They should have been able to spread that story. And I am sorry. I'm sorry here. I'm going to apologize. Okay. I'm sorry that I bought into it. I know Joe. Okay. And a part of me is still I'm sorry if you think I'm nuts, but a part of me still is going to love him for the rest of my life because of the kindness that he's shown to me. But now I know he's corrupt.
Well, we're going to dive into all that corruption.
I know everybody out there.
We did it the right way. And that is why I feel so strongly about illegal immigration. Let me tell you, it's illegal immigration. Why can't we say illegal aliens? Isn't that what they are? Like, enough of the euphemisms.
Look, I think we can understand why someone would have gratitude to a person like Joe Biden who's been kind to them and feel mixed feelings or feel conflicted when you recognize that the person who's been kind to you has been massively incompetent or deceptive with other things. So I think it should be fairly easy to understand the emotional whiplash that Lindy Lee has gone through.
Okay, Democrats police our language, and it's ridiculous. These people are illegal immigrants. We waited for years to come here. We came here with $200. We never took a handout. We did everything the right way. We built our life through blood, sweat, and tears. And that is the way it should be. No one should be storming the southern border. Okay? Mm-hmm. We all had desperate lives. The CCP was literally killing us. So, it's just, we are not the trash can of the world.
It's interesting, though. I mean, I'm just curious because a lot of, you see a lot of people that come from communist countries or have roots in communist countries, China, Cuba, Venezuela. I mean, you go to South Florida and Cubans are everywhere. Terrified that the U.S. is going to wind up like Cuba. And a lot of the people of Chinese descent that I talk to, too, are terrified that the U.S. is starting to turn into communism in some way, shape, or form. And so I'm just curious, what was the path to becoming a Democrat? Are your parents Democrats?
No, they weren't even really political.
They're not political.
Well, I grew up in suburban Pennsylvania, and that was Democratic. So my local congressman actually was a veteran named Joe Sestak. Have you heard of him? He was a three-star admiral. And so it was almost by default. I interned for him starting at age 13, and then it was Obama. He was elected when I was 17 years old, so I was fully indoctrinated. I went to Princeton. It's like a very, very liberal bastion. Mm-hmm. Being a conservative there was a blemish. You just couldn't. I can think of like two conservatives, two Republicans. It was just not a thing you could do. It was the age of Obama. People were enthralled by him. So it wasn't an option to be a Democrat. I actually didn't realize until...
Okay, so Daniel says in the chat regarding Lindy's complaint about policing language, like violating the First Amendment, both free speech and free press, by kicking reporters out because they said Gulf of Mexico instead of Gulf of America. Well, I don't agree with what the Trump administration did here. It has nothing to do with the First Amendment or free speech or free press. All right? The Associated Press is completely free to call the Gulf of America whatever it wants. The Trump administration is not legally required to allow them access to briefings. So it has nothing to do with the First Amendment. Right, what the Trump administration is doing is petty, but you're so dramatically overstating your case that you sound silly. This is not a threat to free speech. It's not a threat to the First Amendment. It's just petty. All right, Ben Sixsmith has a column, The Commentator's Privilege, and he discusses a Guardian columnist here.
The Commentator's Privilege. I wouldn't have expected George Monbiot, the longtime Guardian columnist, to sound like a grizzled war hawk, but there he was on Question Time comparing Matt Goodwin to Neville Chamberlain for suggesting that Ukraine might have to abandon some of the territory it has lost to the Russians. I don't like this sort of moralistic argument. If someone has a case for how Ukraine can win its land back, then I would be glad to hear it. Just demanding moral courage as if that can take the place of men and material is not so compelling. Still, it was odd to hear this sort of war on terror-era talking point coming from George Monbiot. Monbiot has always been a fairly independent-minded columnist, criticizing his cousins on the left when he disagrees with them. For what it's worth, I enjoy reading his columns. A consistent theme of his work, though, has been opposition to defense spending. If we were to cut the military budget by 80 or 90%, Monbiot declared in 2006, we would do ourselves nothing but good. No country that is capable of attacking NATO countries is willing to do so, he insisted, and no country that is willing is capable. So what role remains for our armed forces? A small one. We could cut defense spending by 90% and suffer no loss to our national security, Monbiot announced in 2009. Stop building tanks. So averse was Monbiot to the arms trade that he stopped buying poppies, or announced that he was going to do so, because the Royal British Links had links to defense manufacturers. In 2020, amid the pandemic, Monbiot maintained that Britain had been spending hundreds of billions against imaginary hazards. If ever there were a time to reassess the genuine threats to our security and separate them from the self-interested aims of the weapons industry, he concluded, this is it. So, between 2006 and 2020, Britain should have been cutting its armed forces to the bones. Now, suddenly, it should be dedicated to supporting Ukraine in its pursuit of total victory. A lot can change in 5 years. Now, I'm not accusing Monbiot of dishonesty here. He has openly changed his mind. In 2024, he announced that the time had come for rearmament. Yes, it had abruptly turned out that a hostile nation might attack a NATO member after all, and the US might not come to our defense. With great discomfort, Monbiot wrote, I find myself open to arguments for rearmament. I now believe we need to enhance our conventional capabilities, both to support other European nations against Russia and, something that seemed unimaginable a few years ago, perhaps to defend ourselves. It is admirable when somebody can change their mind. But we opinion commentators have the luxury of being able to change our minds as and when we feel like it. Imagine if we lived in Monbiot world. Between the noughties and the tens, Britain had reduced its defense spending by 90%. Perhaps other NATO members had followed suit. Now, suddenly, it had to change course. Soldiers had to be recruited and trained. Tanks, and ships, and planes had to be purchased or constructed. Does Monbiot think that this could be accomplished at his convenience? It takes years to rearm, and if Western states had been listening to people like him over the past 2 decades, Putin could have sipped his morning coffee in Kiev sometime in 2022. Yes, the situation has changed, as Monbiot says. But a nation needs a strong military in peacetime because the situation can change. Once the situation has changed, it is a bit late to adapt. We opinion columnists are often freeriders on people who ignore us. We can fantasize about our harebrained schemes and then change course when the facts are too evidently against us, safe in the knowledge that people who count have been ignoring us enough that our opinions can seem outdated rather than embarrassingly and disastrously wrong. Imagine, for example, that after years of saying that fossil fuels are harmless and should be used to our heart's content, I suddenly announced that the situation had changed and I was becoming an environmentalist. Monbiot might be glad to have me on the team, of course, but I think he would suggest a little more self-reflection. The world demands constant realism, because when politicians, unlike opinion columnists, change course, they can do so across the bodies of the people who fell victim to their earlier mistakes.
Okay, let's return to the chat. Some comments here by Daniel Price. Says, it's an affront to free speech. Read the First Amendment in its entirety. Okay, where's the bloody First Amendment here? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So there's absolutely nothing, zero, zip, zilch, in the First Amendment that pertains to the Associated Press not getting or maintaining a position in the White House press corps. Like, how on earth do you jump from this petty, badly thought through decision by the Trump administration to claiming that it's a First Amendment issue? There's absolutely zero empirical or logical basis for making the claim. You have such an emotional need to believe that everything's a crisis that you claim that this is a First Amendment issue. There's nothing here. Which phrase, right, pertains to this issue? Right, there's nothing with regard to the Trump administration banning the Associated Press from a certain position in the White House press corps or traveling pool that has anything to do with the First Amendment, and that you claim it does, it shows that either you lack reading comprehension, which I do not believe. You're obviously very intelligent, but you are so emotionally tied into hatred for the Trump administration that you just can't help but lying. The entire premise of the First Amendment, says Daniel, of adding the bit about not infringing on a free press was for that very thing, to maintain the Associated Press' sacred right to be in a press pool, for the press to keep the people in power honest by exposing them if need be. So how is that right at all abridged by not allowing the Associated Press in a particular White House press pool? It's not. Right? You, sir, are hysteric. You, sir, feel no compunction about lying to try to further your cause, and yet all you do is discredit your cause by being such a hysteric. Absolutely nothing to do with the First Amendment, this petty White House decision to not give the Associated Press a place in the press pool. Associated Press is completely free to call it the Gulf of Mexico. All right, Politico. Democrats concede Republicans running circles around them online as Trump remakes Washington. I am stunned by the lack of cohesion, cohesiveness, and effectiveness on the part of Trump's opposition and the Democrats. All right, the Democratic response to Trump is too slow, too tepid, not meeting the moment. All right, the Doge, Department of Government Efficiency, created its own account on X last November, amassed 4 million followers with a stream of news on contract cancellations and other cuts to the bureaucracy. The Democratic National Committee, meanwhile, started a rapid response account in January with 121,000 followers. Democrats held traditional rallies outside the USAID and Treasury buildings where Chuck Schumer was mocked on late-night TV and even by some within his own party after leading a chant of "We will win." Right, so why the halting response by Democrats to a flood of pro-Doge messaging? Right? Why are Democrats so inept? Why are they protesting on wrong platforms? Right, why are they convening a conventional show of resistance for local and national TV cameras while largely leaving unanswered the torrent of MAGA orthodoxy and often disinformation online? Right, Trump and the Republicans are able to use different types of media to get their message across, and Democratic leaders are missing the mark, not only in the election, but in Resistance 2.0. Right, Democrats are getting swamped. Conservative personalities hold 5 of the top 10 podcasts on Spotify. Only New York Times columnist Ezra Klein cracks the top 10 list. So 3 months after their losses in the November election, Democrats concede they are losing an asymmetrical battle with the president and his MAGA allies. Trump and Musk are dominating online space, and there is no consensus among Democrats on how to fix their rapid response problems, no consensus on who's to blame. Republicans are running circles around Democrats for how to connect to the culture today. One Democrat says, "People are asking me, who is Theo Von? Even if Democrats have the best messaging, you can't connect if you're not part of modern American culture, if you're not in spaces where people already are." So Democrats have a major weakness in reaching voters outside traditional channels, TikTok, YouTube, X, Facebook. Right, majority of swing voters and new Trump voters get their news primarily from social media and from alternative sources such as podcasts, broadcast news, and cable news, and newspapers are far less popular with Republicans compared to Democrats. Republicans' ability to speak into social media ecosystem is sharper, more precise. Democrats are way behind. There's a fight for the attention economy, and Republicans are winning. And there's not even apparently a possibility right now that's clear of the Democrats getting their act together. Democrats are getting steamrolled online. There's nothing they can do about it. There's no single coordinating body or person to push a responsive message. All right, I love this Lindy Lee interview here.
Recently that I could be a Republican. And let me remind you, I live in Philadelphia, where there's this 8-to-1 voter registration difference. It's not okay to be a Republican. You're ostracized. I've lost all my friends, Shawn. friends. They were fake. I mean, I actually had someone berating me, someone whom I thought was a friend.
Your friends weren't fake. All right. I went 14 years without seeing my brother. We would have phone calls and Skype, but you can reconnect with family. You don't have to, without it being a big deal, you don't have to put as much effort into maintaining relations with family as you do with friends. Friendships require maintenance. Friendships work better when you have common values, when you see things similarly. So when Lindy Lee felt largely aligned with the Democratic Party, right, she had legitimate friendships with fellow Democrats. When she felt disillusioned by the Democratic Party and started speaking out, then of course she's going to lose her friends. Like, I moved to Los Angeles in March of 1994, and all my friends had a connection to Dennis Prager. Then when I started posting some critical remarks about Dennis Prager online in December of 1996, I lost all of my friends in Los Angeles because Dennis Prager asked me not to write anything about him. And so everybody sided with Dennis Prager. He had more status, more prestige. He seemed more solid, a better bet. I understand they all just sided with Dennis Prager. I lost all my friends. Now, in the process, right, I was on the road to developing more independence and more clarity. It was incredibly painful, but I made it through the rain. And I became, what's that song by Barry Manilow? With the lyrics, I made it through the rain. Right, incredibly painful. We dreamers have our ways of facing rainy days, and somehow we survive. We keep the feelings warm, protect them from the storm until our time arrives. Then one day the sun appears and we come shining through those lonely years. I made it through the rain. I kept my world protected. I made it through the rain. I kept my point of view. I made it through the rain and found myself respected by the others who got rained on too and made it through. God, I love Barry Manilow. Barry Manilow's greatest hits. You know, I've listened to them thousands of times. When friends are hard to find and life seems so unkind, sometimes you feel afraid. Just aim beyond the clouds, and rise above the crowds and start your own parade. Because when I chased my fears away, that's when I knew I could finally say, I made it through the rain. So there was this woman who told me, woman about my age, who says in the early 80s, when Air Supply had so many hits, she said to her mother, are they going to become more popular than the Beatles? Because it felt at that time, because Air Supply was releasing so many hits, that they were on a trajectory to become more popular than the Beatles. So how did Air Supply lose its momentum? Right? They did so many great songs in the early 80s, but then their last hit was Making Love Out of Nothing at All. Don't believe they've had any hits since. I've listened to their albums since. They're never going to capture that magic they had in 1980, 81, 82. So you see this bloke here on Mark Halperin's show. He's a key Republican spokesman.
Collectively have now rallied around. They're on the record supporting, advocating for fraud, waste, and abuse in the federal government. It blows my mind that they're out there touting and arguing against these cuts that are clearly necessary. The American people deserve to know where their money is being spent, how it is being spent, and Republicans have been focusing on those receipts. Thankfully, Donald Trump and Doge have worked together to say, guys, here's where this money's being misspent, here's where it's being misused. And I remember, because I'm old enough, that Democrats used to care about the government and the fraud and the waste and abuse. Now it seems they're on the side of supporting these entities that have been long known to have wasted our taxpayer dollars.
But could both instances be true, meaning the president...
Okay, Lindy Lee, powerful interview on Shawn Ryan's show.
He was texting me. He basically said, how could you? You can never reply to questions like that. So in my Instagram story, I replied to everybody. I was like, shaming me isn't going to change a single thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, Shawn, I've lost.
So you kind of got groomed into it.
It just, there was no other option.
Yeah.
There were no other Republicans. Like, where were they? I lived in the collar counties of Pennsylvania. They're all Democrats.
Yeah. Okay. And so you interned at 13?
Yeah, I'm kind of weird. I had a really difficult childhood.
You did?
I did, yeah.
How so?
It's just tough being an immigrant kid. I love my parents, but it was tough. It was really tough. English is my second language. It's my parents' second language. I survived childhood by playing Chopin and Tchaikovsky and Liszt and Mozart and Beethoven on the piano for hours on end. That is how I survived. And like, who said it? Was it Nietzsche or somebody else? Somebody said it. Was it Nietzsche? He said, without music, life would be a mistake. And I survived by hanging on to music.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you?
I survived by hanging on to music too. Like Air Supply got me through some very difficult years. Luke's taste in music is horrific, says the chat. I don't think I've ever known anyone who listened to Air Supply. And there's a novel out there, a mystery novel in defense of Barry Manilow. Right? So it's called, what's it called? But yeah, there's a whole novel, and it's a mystery novel, Misdemeanor Man, right? About a bloke who's a reluctant public defender by day and the wildly enthusiastic lead singer in a Barry Manilow cover band by night. Perfectly content to handle petty cases for the rest of his career, he dreams that Manilow, the real Barry Manilow, will one day show up at his band's gig. So, beautiful novel in defense of Barry Manilow. So, I guess a lot of my tastes are quite lowbrow, right? I follow sports, lowbrow. I listen to pop music, lowbrow. I also listen to a lot of classical music. But a large part of what I choose for entertainment is just based on, is it meeting my needs? And just what feels good, right? I don't have to rationalize it. If it feels good and I don't think it's doing me any harm, I embrace it. And my God, when I started listening to pop music, the first pop song that entered my consciousness was Puff the Magic Dragon. And my brother and sister got busted by my Christian parents for listening to pop music, listening to Puff the Magic Dragon. And then the next pop song that entered my awareness, so that was in the early 70s when I was living in Australia. Then the next pop song that entered my awareness was Sing by the Carpenters. I still love that song. Right? People still mock me for loving Sing. Sing a song, sing out loud, sing out strong, sing of good times, not bad, sing of happiness, not sad. I love Sing by the Carpenters. And yeah, people look at me askance when I'm playing that. And I was in Munich, right? I was in Munich for the 1972 Olympics, right? I have run that by two people. So on September 5, when Israeli hostages, the Israeli Olympic team, was taken hostage and then murdered, right? I was in Munich. We were staying with a friend of my father's, Norman Young, who was doing a PhD in New Testament studies at the University of Tübingen. We were staying in his apartment. So I would have been 6 years of age. My brother was 15, so he remembers the Munich Olympics massacre much more clearly than I do. But it's my memories of that just out of reach. The Israeli Olympic athletes didn't make it through, but I made it through the rain. God, that's terrible. I shouldn't speak that way about a massacre. I was playing Moonlight Sonata one Christmas, and my mom said, "That old warhorse." Yeah, I love. Oh, Greensleeves was another piece of music that moved me as a kid. And then the Christian song, I think, Rise Again. And I'll rise, and he'll rise again. Ain't no power on earth to hold me down. So I loved that. I loved a lot of Christian rock. There was a Christian magazine aimed at college kids, but it spoke in a real way. That it was the last time that Christianity really spoke to me. And my parents bought me a subscription during my final years of high school, 83, 84. So Sing a Song by the Carpenters, I felt so happy when I heard that. And then my parents moved to Washington, D.C. I got to finish 8th grade, stayed behind at Pacific Union College. So December I was away from home and I put a radio under my pillow. I was listening primarily to the AM band, so I listened to KNBR 680 out of San Francisco at night and listened to Air Supply and just fell in love with Air Supply. And my friend's favorite band, my best friend's favorite band was ABBA, and Air Supply was his second favorite. Air Supply was my favorite, and it just so moved me from end of 1979 until about 1988, when I thought I shouldn't listen to so much pop music. That's when I started to fall out of touch with pop music, started listening more to classical music.
You interned at 13.
And that went on. It wasn't just 13. It was like 13, 14, like the entire time. It started then.
So you had interest in politics at age 13.
Absolutely. Actually, and you know the people who guided me, it was a guy named Bill Walsh. He was also a veteran. He was part of the Navy, and he even today, when I started exposing the Democrats and their corruption, he continually sends me messages saying how he's still proud of me. This is a Navy vet, you know. You guys have always had my back. It's just so yeah, I've always wanted to I had to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand? You're one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell. You just got to.
Yeah.
A normal life would be the greatest. It would be the worst fate.
I got to admit, I've hit the